Before we come to the motion in the House, motions in the name of the Leader of the House, can I remind the House in relation to motions number 4 of the requirement for honourable members to declare any relevant interest or benefit which might relate to the proceedings in which they are participating. I must draw attention to the fact that the motion on the Code of Conduct and Guide to the Rules appears on the printed order paper with a small error. Paragraph 2A of Chapter 4 to the Guide to the Rules refers to advice about public policy and current affairs, which appears incorrectly as advice about public policy and public affairs. This has been corrected in line and correctum has been issued. The motion on the Modernisation Committee will be debated with this motion. I inform the House that the Speaker has selected amendments B, C, D and E to the Modernisation Committee motion as listed on the order paper. I shall call members to move their amendments formally and explain proceedings further at the appropriate time. Standing Order number 22C requires the Clerk of the House as accounting officer to set out the expected financial consequences of motions which have direct consequences of additional expenditure of at least £50,000. I should inform the House that a memorandum on the financial consequences of the Modernisation Committee motion is available in the vote office. I call the Leader of the House to move the first motion on Code of Conduct and Guide to the Rules in the form it appears online.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I congratulate you on your election as Chair of Ways and Means, and I look forward to working with you in the coming weeks. Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the motions standing in my name. Over the past 2 weeks, it's been fantastic to watch so many new members hit the ground running representing their constituents, and it's been a pleasure to see returning members resume their business, bringing their considerable experience and wisdom to this chamber. Madam Deputy Speaker, this new Parliament offers a chance to turn the page after the sorry and sordid record of the last. We face a crisis in trust in politics, politicians and Parliament. As we know, it's a great privilege to sit in this House. To be an MP represents an opportunity to change the country for the better, and underpinning that privilege is a set of solemn responsibilities. Chief among these is the responsibility we all have to embody the highest standards of public service. These standards are articulated in the 7 principles of public life, which apply to all those who operate in public life and which inspire and inform the code of conduct for MPs. It's perfectly reasonable for a constituent to expect that, when they cast their vote in a general election, their candidate will be sent to this House to serve them, not serve themselves. An MP's first priority, therefore, must be to their constituents, and the rules of this House must reflect that obligation. This government was elected with a mandate for change, and the Prime Minister pledged to return us to a politics of service. Today, we take our first steps to deliver this. In line with the government's manifesto commitment, I am proposing a tightening of the rules on second jobs for members of this House in the first instance. Under current arrangements, members must not provide or agree to provide paid parliamentary advice. They must also not undertake services as a parliamentary strategist, advisor or consultant. This rule prohibits members from advising outside organisations or persons on, for example, how they may lobby or otherwise influence the work of Parliament in return for payment. However, the guide to the rules contains exemptions. These exemptions mean that advice on public policy and current affairs and advice in general terms about how Parliament works are not considered parliamentary advice.
Will my right honourable friend give way?
I will give way on that point.
Thank you to my right honourable friend for giving way. During the election campaign, I made a solemn promise to my constituents that I would not take on a second job, apart from being Chief of Staff to my 2-year-old son. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's time to end public policy and current affairs advocacy roles so that we all have time to spend on the greatest job of all, representing our constituents?
Well, my honourable friend makes a very good point, and that's exactly the purpose of this motion. And I hope that he also has time to do his other job of being a great parent. I know he will be as well. But these exemptions that I describe potentially act as loopholes, allowing a member to use their privileged position and knowledge for personal gain. This may encourage not only a potential conflict of interest, but a conflict of attention too, with too much of a member's time and energy spent on things other than constituency or parliamentary business. I am very grateful to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards for his advice on this matter and diligent provision of guidance to all members on adherence of the Code of Conduct. So this motion puts an end to the exemptions. It sends a clear signal to the public that an MP's first priority is to their constituents and to the country. It's a first step. These changes shall come into effect 3 months from the date that this motion is passed, which will allow members the chance to make any necessary changes to existing contracts or arrangements. Yes, I'm happy to give way.
I thank the Leader of the House for giving way, and I welcome the statement that she's making. Will she agree with me that being an MP is an honour and a privilege and should be a full-time job, and that the problem of second jobs goes wider than the limited issues that she's addressing in her motion today? As an example of the sort of behaviour that, in my view, should not be permitted is, say, for example, an MP acting as managing director of a financial services company headquartered in a tax haven, in which case they maybe have a conflict of attention with potentially assisting people to avoid tax when, of course, we should all be serving the public interest. So can I ask her, will she act urgently to put forward further measures to prevent the type of behaviours I've drawn attention to here? Thank you.
Well, she makes a really good point, and absolutely this is about conflict of interest and also conflict of attention. And as I have made clear and will make clear further in my opening remarks, this is a first step, and we do need to look at some of those other areas to give our constituents confidence that this will eradicate the kind of behaviour that she describes. Madam Deputy Speaker, this House has considered such issues before. Most recently, the Committee on Standards reviewed the Code of Conduct in the previous Parliament. Similarly, the Independent Committee on Standards in Public Life has looked at this matter several times, issuing recommendations on MPs' outside interests, both in 2009 and 2018, and I thank them all for their work. Today's change then forms part of an ongoing conversation, one that I trust we will continue as we begin to rebuild public trust in this institution. And we will go further, Madam Deputy Speaker. The motions we are considering today also establish a new Modernisation Committee of the House of Commons, fulfilling another manifesto commitment. This committee will be tasked with driving up standards and addressing the culture of this House, as well as improving working practices. I will give way on that point.
Thank you very much. I'm one of many newcomers to this chamber, and the first time I spent in this chamber was on last Friday afternoon when some irregular things happened. I wonder whether the Leader of the House would agree with me that it is the conduct of members in this chamber, as well as issues around second jobs and conduct outside, that really has in the past given politics and all of us here a bad reputation. And that if we're going to solve these problems, when people turn on the television or Parliament Live, they want to see people listening respectfully, not heckling, not shouting out and not calling names.
Well, he makes a really important point, and part of what we are beginning today is about restoring respect, both in Parliament and in politics, but amongst one another. And I have been really encouraged by the enthusiasm of new members like himself towards this agenda, and I hope he will continue to be involved in that. But the modernisation will also look at reforms to make Parliament more effective, bringing recommendations and responding swiftly to the views of the House. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Modernisation Committee is intended to bring a more strategic lens to these matters and, where necessary, the pace of change in these matters. This is not to cut across the important work of existing committees, but to highlight interdependencies and facilitate closer working. I describe it as a clearinghouse, drawing on all the good work of other committees. The Government wants to build consensus for any reforms, bringing the House together by consulting widely. The deliberations of the committee will be transparent and published, making clear to members the thinking which has informed any recommendations for change. A very important aspect of this committee, I think. I intend to listen to colleagues regardless of their party affiliation as we take this work forward, drawing on the diverse range of views and experiences represented in this House. Turning to the amendments on the order paper, I hope I can provide some reassurances to members on some of their concerns. The existing committee structures in this House, including the Procedures Committee, Standards, Privileges, Administration and of course the House Commission, will have a vital role to play in the work of the Modernisation Committee. Indeed, it will draw heavily on their work and their recommendations. However, the pace of change we have witnessed in recent years in enacting such recommendations has demonstrated the value of a modernisation committee. The risk-based exclusions of members or improvements to the ICGS scheme and the introduction of proxy votes to cover serious long-term illnesses or injury are prime examples of the glacial pace that we often move at. The purpose of the Modernisation Committee is not to duplicate the important work carried out by existing select committees, but rather to highlight and consider their recommendations in the round. As the Standards Committee itself has noted in its May 2024 report, the standards landscape in Parliament is one that brings together an array of actors and regulatory bodies whose arrangements are often considered in isolation from one another. It's my hope that the Modernisation Committee will be able to bring a broader perspective to these issues and will work closely with the existing parliamentary committees whose reports and evidence will shape its work. This new committee will have the ability to collect evidence and for chairs to be guested onto it when relevant, and I will be sure to rely on expertise and experience of all members. And yes, of course, I'll give way.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. I wonder if she could explain if there is a relationship between the Modernisation Committee and the Ethics and Integrity Commission that is being set up, and if so, what that relationship is.
Well, I thank her for that intervention, and she, of course, has done much good work in this space over the years herself. And she's referring to the Government's Ethics and Integrity Commission, which is more focused on government members, ministers and civil servants and others. Obviously, this work is particularly focused on Parliament and the House of Commons. So there may be a relationship at times, but obviously we have a different remit and scope, and I hope that satisfies her question. And I want to reassure the House that as the proposed chair of the committee, my door will always be open to members and staff across the House. As I've said, I see this more as a task and finish committee, which the Honourable Member for North Fife gave me as a good comment the other day, taking a strategic look at recommendations from other bodies and committees, not itself duplicating their work. Madam Deputy Speaker, I also note the amendment from the Honourable Member for Aberdeen North about the engagement of smaller parties and their role on the Modernisation Committee. I hope I've gone some way to provide some reassurances on aspects of that, but I do want to be clear that I want members from across the House to be heard, but the committee also needs to be an effective body that delivers change. If the committee is going to be able to work swiftly and generate momentum behind the proposals for reform, it needs to be of an appropriate size. If each party were to be represented, as her amendment recommends, the committee size would grow considerably and would not be able to be representative of other committees in the House, which I don't think is reasonable in terms of those proportions. So, yeah, I'm happy to seek away.
Just specifically on that, given the breakdown that committees are likely to fall in, does she understand that only 3 parties will be represented on that committee, and it would be possible to flex it slightly and still keep it relatively small, but have voices from more than just 3 parties?
I do understand her concern with that, and that is an unfortunate case of the mathematics of how these things are considered across all select committees. Yeah, and in the past, Parliament her party has benefited from those formulas on other occasions. But I'll just reassure further, because I think beyond formal membership, I want to be absolutely clear that I want to commit to there being regular and meaningful engagement with any and all parties represented in this House and members who want to contribute. Yeah, I will give way. I'll give way to both gentlemen.
Thanks the leader for giving way, but this, for me, seems a little bit unfair. We have a political party represented in this House that got over 4 million votes at the last election, and we will have no representation whatsoever on the committees. Yet we've got a party that got 3.5 million votes that will have plenty of representation on the committees. Does the leader think that's fair?
Yeah. Well, as he knows, he has 4 members of this House, and the House is considered in terms of its members, not in terms of the popular vote, and that is a consequence of those formula which are long-standing and have brought about effective representation on many select committees. I'll bring in.
I thank the Leader of the House for bringing this forward. Leader of the House, I understand the mathematics of the party that has over 400, those who have 120, those who have 72, and so on. I understand how the committees are made up and how government and opposition works. But when it comes to more parochial things, for instance, the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, the Scottish Affairs Committee, the Welsh Affairs Committee, does the Leader of the House agree with me that there should be more representation from those regional areas on that committee, ever mindful that government has a right to have the majority?
Well, yeah, perhaps there is an opportunity here to have a wider debate on the makeup of select committees on the whole, because I can see some of those issues. But I do just want to reiterate, when it comes to the Modernisation Committee, which is a balance between being effective and making some fast progress and being representative but not sort of too big, I do want to reiterate my commitment to the smaller parties for ongoing, meaningful engagement and coming to the committee regularly to give evidence and views. And of course, the proceedings of that committee will be fully transparent, and we will do calls for evidence, and our deliberations will be regularly published for the whole House to see. I will give way.
Thank you for giving way. My honourable friend here has just made a very good case and asked you a specific question. Is it fair? And by your lack of reply, you, I think, implicitly agree it's not fair. And you have it in your power to change this in the matter of fairness and listening to smaller parties. And I think constituents all over the country, if you don't agree with that, will find that absolutely astonishing.
Just before the leader responds, can people refrain from using the word you? You are speaking through the chair. Thank you. Leader of the House.
Look, what is fair is that this House is made up of members of Parliament who are elected by their constituency, and then subsequent subcommittees, if you like, select committees of this House are then made up a proportion of those members of this House. That is what is fair, and that has always been the case. And as I say, I mean, it could be the case that as an incoming government with a really clear mandate to change and to rebuild trust in politics and restore respect in Parliament, and with a very large majority in this House, we could have proceeded without trying to take the House with us, without setting up a committee, but just by bringing forward on a diktat basis various motions to take this forward. I absolutely did not want to take that approach. I wanted to take the House with us to represent all Parliament, all of the Parliament, all parties and all of the committees and so on. And that's why I commit again to the smaller parties having that regular, meaningful engagement with the committee on issues of particular concern to them. And on this final point, I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Right Honourable Member for giving way. On this point, because this is a select committee that you are setting up, beg your pardon, that the Honourable Lady is setting up specifically with the motion today on the topic of modernisation of this place, is this not an opportunity to demonstrate a tiny bit of modernisation by using the opportunity to ensure that there is representation within the makeup of that committee of the small parties, perhaps not one from every party, but at least of the smaller parties, as a indication of goodwill towards the concept of modernisation and representation of small parties within the consideration of how we can take this forward.
And that's why the committee will engage with regular and meaningful, because all I would say is, look, if there was, let's say there was one more place on the committee for a smaller party, who would that go to? Would it represent the various views of all the different smaller parties? Would it represent Reform or the Greens or the Scottish National Party or the DUP? And everybody would have a very strong and different view about that. I actually think that to represent properly that range of views across the smaller parties, this commitment to an ongoing meaningful engagement and a regular dialogue, and all smaller parties being invited in to speak to the committee on a regular basis, is actually far more representative of the views and of the range of smaller parties in this House than actually having one representative on the committee itself. So I will make some progress if that's okay. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I also want to reassure the traditionalist amongst us. As I've previously said, this is not about altering the traditions and customs of this place. Rather, the Modernisation Committee builds on the work of its namesake, previously appointed in earlier Labour administrations. Those predecessor committees achieved great reforms in the way the Commons works, the introduction of public bill committees, the arrival of Westminster Hall debates, changing to sitting hours and recess dates, all reforms which improve scrutiny and help make Parliament a more inclusive and family-friendly place to work. I would welcome suggestions from members on further changes it may be helpful for the Modernisation Committee to consider to make Parliament more effective, modern working environment, and one that better reflects the country it serves, and help the public better understand the work that we do and that we are here to serve them. Madam Deputy Speaker, turning to the committee's initial work, I hope we will look further into members outside employment as one of our first steps, as we have just discussed. We will aim to consider, in conjunction with the Committee on Standards and Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, whether any more changes to the rules or the code itself are necessary. In particular, changes intended to ensure an MP's private or personal interests do not impede their principal duties to this House. But the scope of the Modernisation Committee will be more than second jobs. Beyond reforms to the standard system, the Modernisation Committee will consider the culture, procedures and working practices of this House. Parliament's ability to hold the government to account is essential. Our goal should be to maximise the time available for scrutiny of the government's legislative programme while ensuring backbench voices remain prominent and effective. Our constituents are best served when parliamentary time is spent both on robust scrutiny of legislation and debates where issues that matter most to members and our constituents can be raised. And I look forward to hearing the views of all members when assessing how we best achieve this and where changes may be required. Making Parliament accessible to all members is of paramount importance too. There has been good work done over the years in seeking to tackle the reports of inappropriate and wrong behaviour we have all heard and suffered from. The Speakers' Conference in the last session did important work on the conditions for member staff. Likewise, I'm grateful to Paul Kernahan for his recent review of the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme and the reviews of Alison Stanley before him. We will look at taking his recommendations forward. And of course, only in May of this year, the Committee on Standards produced an excellent report on the standards landscape in Parliament, bringing together analysis of and recommendations on all elements of the standards system. These pieces of work are essential and they cannot be considered in isolation. We need to take a strategic approach to these issues so that gaps in the system do not develop. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have today an opportunity to set out clearly and firmly the standards we should all aspire to in this House, the standards the public expects of their elected representatives. We have an opportunity to put politics back to the service and signal an immediate end to the politics of self-interest through a tightening of the rules on second jobs. And we have an opportunity to establish a body that will examine this House in the round and bring it up to date. I look forward to this debate and I am grateful to the huge interest that this committee has already garnered. Thank you.
The question is, as on the order paper, I call the Shadow Leader of the House, Mr. Philp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a great pleasure to address you by your new title. We were first elected together in 2015, and it's a real pleasure to see the first of the 2015 intake assuming the chair and presiding over our proceedings. And I'm delighted to be here at the dispatch box for Madam Deputy Speaker for your first appearance in the chair, the first, I'm sure, of many over the coming years, in fact I hope the coming decades. So congratulations, Madam Deputy Speaker. Congratulations, Madam Deputy Speaker, on your very well-deserved election. As the Leader of the House set out already at the beginning of her very eloquent and detailed speech, standards and integrity are critical to this House of Commons. We are the crucible of our nation's democracy. Our constituents have sent us here to represent them, and our constituents are entitled to expect the very highest standards of behaviour from us as members of Parliament. Now, we're fortunate, I think, that in this country our standards in public life are higher than they are in many countries, but there is no room for complacency, and we should constantly strive to improve and perfect the standards met in this House. It's a duty I think we owe the public. So, in broad terms, I welcome the initiative that the Leader of the House has taken in this area. I would just make a couple of general points before talking about some of the specific matters before us. And really the first of those is that I think it is very important for these reforms, or any reforms, to command public confidence and to be seen to be conducted for the best of reasons. It is important that we do proceed, I think, on a cross-party basis. And I would be, because then it shows that the measures are being taken not for party political reasons, but for the best of reasons, as I'm sure they are, and to make sure they stick. I mean, if there's a broad cross-party consensus, whatever the reforms are will then endure and survive beyond any change of government in the future. I hope from my point of view the near future, but I suspect not from the point of view of the Leader of the House. But if the measures taken do have a broad consensus, then they will endure. So I'd be grateful if the Leader, in her summing up at the end, could just confirm to the House that she does intend to approach these matters, specifically on the Modernisation Committee, but also more broadly as well, on the basis of achieving cross-party consensus so the public can have confidence in what's being done and so that the reforms are enduring. Of course I give way.
With that in mind, and given the need to involve all parties in this, because we're not just talking about this Parliament, we're potentially talking about decades to come, would he agree with me that Amendment B in the name of the Leader of the Opposition is entirely reasonable and indeed addresses some of the issues that have been raised by the minor parties, because it would then potentially bring them in scope?
Yes, I do agree with my right honourable friend, who makes an excellent point based on his long experience of this House. Indeed, it does address some of the points that were made by honourable members a little while ago in their interventions. I would like to just take this opportunity to thank the Leader of the House for the consultations we have had in the last 3 weeks since we were both appointed. The Leader has been collegiate and constructive in her conversations, and I look forward to conversations continuing in that spirit. If I might be permitted one just very small grumble for future reference, the motion we're debating today was laid relatively late on Tuesday evening. I know that it could, under the rules, have been laid later, so I do appreciate the fact it was laid a little bit in advance, but we didn't have a lot of time to discuss potential amendments between the two of us, or indeed with other parties. And if I can just make a request for the future, if we're considering motions that touch on these issues, where we're seeking a sort of cross-party approach, it would be really helpful just to have some more time in order to be able to discuss them between the Leader and myself and other parties, just to see if we can improve the motions. I know we discussed it in general terms, but it's only when you see the actual black and white of the detail of the motion, for example the one on the Modernisation Committee, that you can really sort of discuss it in proper detail. So I would just appreciate an opportunity in the future just have a bit more time so we can discuss that between us, and that might perhaps avoid the need for laying amendments, and it would enshrine that consensus approach, which I'm hoping she will confirm she will be taking. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me turn to the motion number 4, listed on page 7 of today's order paper under Business of the Day. As the Leader has said already, this removes 2 exemptions that exist in paragraph 2, chapter 4 of the Guide to the Rules, which mean that members will not be able to be paid for providing advice on public policy or current affairs, or advice in general terms about how Parliament works. And that is, I think, broadly a reasonable proposition which we're happy to support. I do have 2 questions of clarification which perhaps she might address in her summing up. The first of those is just to clarify the situation. If a member is pursuing some paid activity that is not specifically to do with offering advice of this kind, so they might be, for example, I don't know, a lawyer, or they might be doing work with a trade union on a paid basis, and the thrust of the work is not to do with this sort of activity, but incidentally and in passing, they briefly undertake activity that might fall into this definition. How would the Leader of the House view that? Is this an absolute, complete prohibition, or is there some sort of materiality test that she would expect the Standards Commissioner to apply? So just her clarification from the dispatch box on that question would be useful. The second question that a colleague has raised is that on occasion, members may have a party political position or a trade union position for that matter, which is paid, in the course of which they might give advice of this nature. So to give a specific example, in the past it's been the case that the chairman of the Conservative Party has been paid not as a minister, but by the Conservative Party. So would this rule preclude that person, or indeed someone being paid by a trade union, probably on the Labour side, would it preclude them from offering the Conservative Party or a trade union advice on public policy matters under this clause? So I'd be grateful if the leader could just shed some light on how she envisages that working. But in broad terms, we do support these changes and will not be opposing them in the new spirit of cross-party working, which we're nervously embracing. It is worth mentioning, just for complete clarity, that there is a third exemption in the rules that the leader didn't refer to. So members currently can be paid for, and this is limb C of the relevant provision, it contained in paragraph 2 of chapter 4. So limb C allows members of Parliament to be paid for making media appearances, journalism, writing books and delivering public lectures and speeches. And just for the sake of complete clarity, it's worth saying that this motion before us does not make any change to that third limb, and so members will be able, as I read it, and as the leader will tell me if I've got this wrong, but in my reading of this motion, members will continue to be able to be paid for those activities. She might just confirm that, but it seems to me a sort of fairly clear consequence of the fact that only limbs A and B are being deleted and not limb C. Madam Deputy Speaker, perhaps I might now move on to the motion number 5, appearing on page 7 of the order paper on the Modernisation Committee. Now, in principle, we on this side of the House will work constructively with the leader and her colleagues to achieve some of the objectives that she set out in her speech earlier. So we've got no objection to the principle of this committee. Of course, we would want to make sure that whatever proposals it brings forward are carefully scrutinised. There are lots of things about the way this House operates that are very important, both for all opposition parties, whether big or small, in terms of holding the government to account, but also for backbenchers, including government backbenchers. So private members' bills. I'm sure members opposite have heard a bit about this. It's a really good opportunity for backbench members on both sides of the House to bring forward typically quite specific bills to bring about a change that the government might not have time to legislate for in government time. But as a backbencher, you can bring forward a bill to do something important to you. So we want to make sure, I think all of us want to make sure that is protected. The Backbench Business Committee, similarly, for example, sets out business on a Thursday when backbenchers, government or opposition, can go to the committee and organise a debate on a particular topic. I did that as a backbencher on the government side a few years ago. It's a really good way of making sure an issue that matters to you as a backbencher on both sides gets aired, not in Westminster Hall or on a committee corridor, but right here in the chamber. So I remember organising one on the persecution of Christians around the world, which wouldn't otherwise necessarily have been debated on the floor of the House, but using that mechanism it was. Westminster Hall is a great opportunity as well to raise issues of concern to your constituency or to you. Opposition Day debates, very important as well, a chance to hold the government to account from an opposition perspective. So a whole load of areas where, for backbenchers on the government side and the opposition side, and for opposition parties, big and small more generally. We do want to make sure that those are protected. I'm sure it's not the leader's intention ever to undermine the effectiveness of those mechanisms. But of course, if those are considered by the committee, we'll need, I think, all of us collectively to make sure that the rights of backbench members of Parliament and opposition parties are properly protected. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, there was I wanted to speak to the amendments tabled in my name and the name of my right honourable friends. And in raising these points, I am hoping that the Leader of the House, in her concluding remarks, can offer some assurances that go beyond those she's given already. And if she is able to offer those assurances, then I won't move these amendments. But if her assurances are not sufficiently robust, then I will move the amendments and we'll have a vote on them. Typically, I should say to members that business of the House like this is not whipped. On this side of the House, we will not be whipping this. If members are free to vote according to their conscience, I hope the government are adopting the same approach with backbenchers and allowing government backbenchers to exercise their conscience. It's a long-standing tradition of this House that House business, which this is not whipped. We're each voting on this as individual members of Parliament. We're not voting on this, I hope, according to a party political whip handed out by the Whip's office. That is the approach we're taking. I hope it's the approach the government are taking as well. But let me speak to these amendments, because they're set out for a purpose. The purpose of these amendments, to be clear, is not to in any way impede or frustrate the objectives that the Leader of the House set out in her speech. We accept her objectives and we, in principle and broad terms, support them and will work constructively with her and with her colleagues. But there are some concerns that have been raised, actually by my colleagues, some of whom may speak later, who have served on some of the committees like the Standards Committee in the past. Now, committees like the Standards Committee, I think in the last Parliament it was chaired by the former member for Peckham, Harriet Harman, she was the mother of the House, very distinguished and highly respected member of this House for many, many years. They've done a lot of work in these areas. It's quite complicated. The way that the standards regime interacts, for example, is not straightforward. The questions are complicated. And Harriet Harman, when she was chair of that committee, spent a lot of time thinking about this and published the report that the leader referred to. The various committees that exist already that are relevant here, particularly the Procedure Committee, the Committee of Privileges, the Committee on Standards and the Administration Committee, are all important committees of the House. They've all done important work in this area previously. They are all elected by the House as well, and at least one of them, the Standards Committee, has independent members, external members. One, for example, I think is a retired Chief Constable. So they do have an element of independence. And I was just concerned that the establishment of the Modernisation Committee might either replace or at least cut across or in some way supersede or impede the work of those House committees which are highly independent. Now, what I've tried to do in these amendments is just make clear a couple of things. And what I'm really looking for is just an explicit assurance from the leader on these points. The first, really, is that if the Modernisation Committee is going to consider a particular matter, then it will firstly consider all of the previous work done by those four committees I mentioned, Procedure, Privileges, Standards and Administration, and secondly, that they will commission the relevant underlying committee to do a fresh report on the matter in hand, to report up to the Modernisation Committee. Now, I think that's what the leader has in mind. It's what she said to me privately, if I understood her correctly. But I'd be really grateful if the leader could just make explicitly clear on the record that that is how she intends this to work. So that was the first important point. The second important point was that the views of the Speaker will always be sought on matters that are relevant to the work of the committee and fully taken into account, because the Speaker has been elected by all of us, unanimously as it happened, and his views, and those of the Deputy Speakers, of course, are very important. Thirdly, that matters that would ordinarily fall to the House of Commons Commission would not be, as it were, usurped by this committee. Now, the leader said to me previously that the functions of the House of Commons Commission are not defined, but I think they are defined in the House of Commons Administration Act 1978. Now, I had also proposed in amendments B and C that the chairs of those committees I mentioned, procedure, privileges, standards and admin, should be added to this committee, so it had 18 members rather than 14, and that would make sure that, firstly, there is an opportunity for a smaller party to serve in that capacity, but also it makes sure that the expertise of those people, those chairs, directly comes to the committee, and in addition to that, the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards attends the committee, not as a member, because as a select committee you have to be a member of Parliament to actually be a member of it, but just as a sort of an attendee or an observer, so that the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards can offer his or her opinion on the matters before the committee and receive papers and give other assistance to the committee as may be required. And all of those amendments I've just gone through are designed to make sure those existing committees are properly taken into account, properly involved, and that their voice is heard, because they are important committees with a lot of experience. And some of these issues you look at first blush, some of the second job issues, for example, and others, and you think, oh, this is quite straightforward. But actually, often it's not straightforward. And there are all kinds of questions with people that have family businesses or a farm, or people that practice as medical, doctors, and all kinds of things like that, which require really careful thought. And I don't want to see the work done previously and in the future to be lost. So what I'm really asking for from the leader is if she can just give very explicit assurances, not in general terms, as she did in her opening speech. She said, oh, they've got a vital role, we'll draw heavily on their work, we won't duplicate what they do. Those were general assurances. I'm asking for the specific assurances that I've just set out. If you can give those, or substantially all of those, then I won't move the amendments, because I do want to try and proceed in a spirit of cross-party harmony, if that is at all possible. Madam Deputy Speaker, this side of the House stands ready to work constructively on these issues to make sure this Parliament's reputation remains the highest of any Parliament anywhere in the world.
Well, harmony is in all of our gifts now, isn't it? Mr. Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's great to see you in the chair. Certainly my first time in the chamber with you in the chair, and I wish you all the very best for the future. And I welcome this government motion. It's great being on the government side for the first time in 14 years, by the way. And I welcome this government motion. It's fulfilling another manifesto pledge within only a few days of the election. And the introduction of a Modernisation Committee, which has already caused a lot of discussion and debate, is all very interesting. The make-up, who should be on it, who shouldn't be on it, why people should be on it. The reality is that the introduction of this committee is extremely important because, of course, standards, integrity in public life is extremely important. And might I say, trust in politics at this moment in time is at an all-time low. Trust in politicians is at rock bottom. We need to change that. And I think the introduction of this Modernisation Committee, together with other elements within the Labour Party manifesto, will make a huge difference. I basically want to focus on second jobs. I mean, we should never forget the responsibilities and obligations that come with being an elected representative, a politician, a member of Parliament in this mother of all parliaments, the mother of all democracies. We should never, ever forget what the general public, what they put into us, and how they believe that we're their representatives, we're the voice in here. Many people who haven't got a voice, particularly in deprived areas, I might add, they've put everything they've got into the fact that their MPs represent them fairly and justly in the Commons. So it's really important. It's not a hobby, this. Being an MP is not a hobby. It's not just something which you fancy and maybe you want to come on a Monday afternoon or a Monday night and then leave as soon as you can, and you're pleading the whips to get away. I mean, this is like a full-time job plus. And if it's not a full-time job plus, I'm afraid my view is you're not doing your job. If you're elected as a member of Parliament with 70-odd thousand constituents, then that's a full-time job. And I cannot for the life of me understand how other people have had and have been able to take up other jobs, other occupations, and see this as basically something that tops up their massive salary elsewhere. That's what's happening, and it continues to happen. And I want to just focus on that part of the debate. During the election campaign, I'm sure everyone in here will agree, when they were knocking on doors, quite often you would get people coming, answering the doors. 99.9% of them very polite, of course, but a lot of people were saying, "You're all the same. You're all the same. You're all liars." I mean, I got told you're all liars. Once you get into the Commons, you say what you say beforehand, and once you get in there, you're all liars. And I mean, I took great exception to that, but you know, that's the way it is. Because that's the perception of the general public, that MPs are greedy, they're liars, they're all the same, they want to make as much money as they can, they're not bothered about the people who they represent. And that's what I think we've got to try and clean up. And I plead with the Leader of the House, my right honourable friend, to make that a priority of the Modernisation Committee. We've got to clean politics up because, as I say, we're not all the same, by the way. We're not all the same. But I genuinely believe the vast majority of people in the Commons, the vast majority of people who are elected, are genuine, decent people who are there to represent their constituents, and they're there to make life better, albeit it's very difficult at times. But, you know, there is a huge lack of faith in politicians and politics. And many people feel, you know, as if the members of Parliament have got a decent wage. And the fact that people with second jobs allow the perception that MPs are, like I mentioned before, selfish and greedy. It allows that perception, that narrative, to continue. I mean, there might, and I'm sure there are, MPs that are greedy. I'm sure there are. But as I say, the general perception is that everyone is the same. And when you look, you know, hey, I never thought in a million years when I was working at the pit that I would be on a salary of £91,346. It's a fortune, you know. It's an absolute fortune. And you've got to work for it. You've got to work for your constituents. And that £91,346, when you look at the average UK salary, which is £35,828 in the North East where I live, it's under £30,000. We're paid fortunes, man. We're nearly millionaires. I know that's not true. However, I make a point. And it's in areas where there's more social deprivation, it becomes a huge problem because people feel as if no matter what you say, what you do, where you perform, where you don't perform, how many surgeries you have, how many casework, how much casework you might have, they just see you as one of the MPs in London that don't care once you get that train or that car or that bus to the House of Commons, you're a different person altogether. 51% of households in Northumberland in 2023 were deemed by the ONS to suffer from some deprivations. And just to give you a flavour, Madam Deputy Speaker, last year Sky News reported that MPs earned £17 million from second incomes last year. Hey, that's a lot of money, mind. A lot of money when a lot of people who we represent are actually using food banks. They're actually claiming benefits in work, and they're suffering greatly as a consequence of the cost of living crisis caused by 14 years of destruction of the Conservative government. But £17 million from second incomes last year, it's enormous. The former Prime Minister Boris Johnson earned £4.8 million from writing speeches in the last year in Parliament. I've got to beg the question, and it's pretty simple. How can you make £4.8 million during a parliamentary year and meet your constituents? What spare time might you have? I would just come to the conclusion that you're, in many ways, not carrying out what you should be as an elected representative. So I don't think second jobs are... Theresa May, in the last year of Parliament, another former Prime Minister, made £2.5 million. Again, exactly the same issue. And remember, the former Conservative Minister earned £6 million as a commercial barrister since joining Parliament. You cannot be making fortunes as a barrister, as a solicitor, as a lawyer, whilst you're supposed to be sitting in the House, when you're supposed to be, determining legislation, when you're supposed to be in this place representing people in the constituency. I mean, that if you cannot, if you're not in the House representing the people who voted you in, whether it be on education matters, the schools, whether it be on the place of work, whether it be on the cost of living crisis. I mean, there's enough for you to be here 5 days a week, from 9 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night to discuss. And where anybody can find spare time as an MP, basically, is beyond me. I hope, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this amendment, I think it is, well, when I say amendment, the amendment to the current legislation laid down in this motion, I hope that the Leader of the House can give us some guarantees that cleaning up politics is number one priority. Because I believe most people, as I've said twice for the third time, most people elected in this chamber are indeed in here for the right purposes. And this, you've got to have skin like a rhino, by the way, because you do get absolutely hammered left, right and centre, regardless of what you vote for and regardless of what you don't vote for. So I think that's me play on this. I think it's a great way forward. I'm delighted that the now Leader of the House, my right honourable friend, has placed this motion before the House, which will address the issues which you have raised. I'll just wind up, Madam Deputy Speaker, by saying the most important thing, in my view, with this place is we lost a lot of credibility with the sleaze that went on, particularly through COVID, and the fact that everybody saw it wasn't just one party. People believed that it was all MPs were making the rules, but not obeying the rules. We've got to change that perception, and I think this Modernisation Committee, along with other measures in the Labour Party manifesto, are going a long way to restoring the trust with the general public, which is much, much needed.
I now call the Lib Dem front bench, Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair, and congratulations on your election. I think it's very important that we're here today to debating what we can do to improve politics, because I think the public that sent us here expect that. And we know that something needs to be done, and I do hope that the Government is going to live up to the aspirations that is set out in order to offer that change. Now, last week, the Leader of the House was kind enough to mention our previous work together on the exclusion ban, and I'm pleased to confirm that I too look forward to continuing these cross-party efforts in this Parliament. And I know that my honourable friend, the member for Honiton and Sidmouth, will be speaking on second jobs later, so I'm largely going to focus my remarks on the question of modernisation and the Modernisation Committee. Now, I know that the Modernisation Committee set up by the last Labour government was not without controversy, and we should recognise that this is a committee that is not going to be subject to the same selection of the chair and election of the chair. It will be chaired by the Leader of the House. But I have had positive engagement with the Leader of the House as an opposition party member, and I think it is important that we ensure that this committee acts in the best interests of the House and does not supersede the remit remit of other committees, such as Standards, which I think very importantly has lay members at its heart. But I acknowledge that this is about restoring trust in this place and in our system, and we know that it is needed just by looking at engagement in the recent general election. Voter turnout overall was only 59.8%, so only 6 in 10 registered voters either thought it was worth engaging with our democratic system or indeed could do so. And in many constituencies it was less than this, in some as little as 4 in 10. And I accept that it's not hard to see why when we look back at the last Parliament. We came in 2019, I was one of the new members then, straight in off the backs of the divisions of Brexit, and then normal life and Parliament was paused during the height of the pandemic. And it was just a matter of weeks after we were back in this place following the second lockdown when the former member for North Shropshire, Owen Patterson, was found by the House to have breached the rules on lobbying, and the then government tried to change the rules in relation to House business in order to allow him to escape censure. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I secured the SO24 emergency debate on standards following that. And in order for new members, in order to secure an emergency debate, you need to have 40 members of the House stand up in support of your debate application. And I'm very pleased that, given the increase in Liberal Democrat numbers, I could have mustered those numbers on my party's own basis. But back in 2021, I was very pleased to have MPs from the now government side as well as from the opposition side in support of that standards debate. And looking back in preparation for today, I can see that I closed my speech in that debate with the following remarks, which is this is about trust. It is about trust in the government that they will represent the House and not the government in House business. And it is about trust in us as our constituents' representatives. And that trust, once eroded, is very difficult to regain. Trust in our politics had been eroded in this past week, and that includes all of us here in the House. And on behalf of all our constituents, we must do all in our power to do our best to rebuild that trust as we take the next steps on standards. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do feel that wasn't the case, despite some of our best efforts, those of us that were in the House. And personally, I'm proud to have passed my amendment to our standing orders that stops MPs from voting in relation to their own censure motions, as the former member for North Shropshire had done. And it was with the support of the Leader of the House and the Honourable Members for Birmingham Yardley and Walthamstow, who's in our place, that we passed the amendment to the exclusion motion earlier this year. And I do hope that that decision by this House sent a message about the seriousness with which we in this place consider the matter of safeguarding. But despite some of those improvements, we still saw rule breaking, indeed law breaking, bullying, sexual harassment and a string of serious questions over conflicts of interest. And it is important that we recognise that we are all tarnished by that brush. What the Government is proposing is also about making this a modern workplace. And I think it's easy for people to forget that this is not just a place where politics and policy happens, but it is a place of work. And not just for us here in this chamber, but for hundreds, thousands of MP staff, as well as those in the House who support us. And indeed, as we start this new Parliament with a new intake of MPs, the churn of staff will be significant. Websites advertising political vacancies are currently overflowing with opportunities. But I can't help but wonder after the last few years if people will want to come and work here. Can this be seen as an attractive workplace where you can not only be safe but also secure and where you can forge a meaningful career? And I'm sure we all know people who we think were capable, in fact, more capable than ourselves of being effective MPs, but who took the decision not to put themselves forward for election. And on that, I hope the Leader of the House will agree, perhaps as part of the committee's work or just generally, to implement the Joe Cox Civility Commission recommendations in relation to the abuse of elected representatives. Now, I have the pleasure of being Chief Whip now to 71 MPs, having welcomed 57 new colleagues to these benches. But I know that the bad behaviour of some cause a lack of trust in all of us. And I was pleased to hear the Leader of the House today to commit to the Modernisation Committee to implementing the independent review of the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme published in May. And I want to draw the House's attention to the third recommendation, which says that if implemented, then if someone makes a complaint to a party about something that falls under the remit of the scheme, then the party have to pass it on to ICGS to be dealt with, rather than attempting to resolve it internally. I'm very aware that the violins for whips are very, very tiny, but they do have a difficult role to do in terms of providing pastoral care, but also looking at discipline. So for me, I think it makes perfect sense to ensure that where there has been inappropriate behaviour, there is a guarantee of an independent review. And I'm pleased to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that what's proposed in this recommendation is already part of the new Liberal Democrat Parliamentary Party's standing orders, and I'd be happy to sign a public declaration accordingly on that basis. I would also urge the Leader of the House to commit to implementing the next steps recommended by the Speakers' Conference, which reported last year. I had the privilege of sitting on the conference and can attest to the time and cross-party work that went into that report. And these package of changes together would create something much closer to a modern HR system, which will benefit staff and MPs. I think the public do accept that MPs are different in that we aren't employees, but they also expect us to adopt modern HR practices where we possibly can. And the underlying point for me, and something I hope that our new MPs can take on board amongst the excitement and honour of being in this place, is this: that our jobs are unusual, but that does not make us special or different when it comes to upholding basic standards. And as I say that as a former police officer who was also not an employee during that time. It does not give us free rein to treat others poorly. We mustn't break the rules. In fact, we ought to be aspiring to a higher standard, to be exemplary, because these unusual and wonderful jobs that we get to hold and do for our constituents. But we do also need to look, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the practices and support in place to allow members to carry out their work effectively. I was disappointed to hear, for example, that the nursery here in Parliament can only offer places from 2026, when we have increasing numbers of new members coming here with family responsibilities. We need to ensure that we give people the support in order to carry out that really important job to the best of our abilities. But returning to the motion, the question of what the Modernisation Committee should be considering, modernisation isn't just about standards and behaviour and making this a 21st century workplace. It is about making this a modern system which is fit for policy decisions to be made for the benefits of our constituents, a workplace that ensures democracy works. And the first proposal I'm going to ask the Leader of the House to consider, which I accept might not be in our party's best interests as they want to power through those first 100 days, but in the spirit of putting democracy first, I urge her to be open, and that is revisiting the right reforms and reviewing the determination of House time. The 2009 report recommended that House Business Committee, made up on a crossbench basis, be able to decide how much time is given to scrutinising government legislation. Now, this might sound boring and technical, but I do think it would be revolutionary. The government would still be able to set the agenda, bring its manifesto forward and its legislation accordingly, but it couldn't tell us in opposition how much time we should take to properly scrutinise it. Now, the right reforms were aimed at ending sleaze and making Parliament and the role of Parliament more meaningful, and those goals remain ever more relevant today. And implementing this last change from the right reform recommendations would make MPs more powerful in representing their constituents. It would connect us in a meaningful way, and it would allow the public to see that MPs are working on their behalf. And it would certainly improve debate, something that I am hoping will improve in this new Parliament. It will make us more open and allows the public to truly understand the nuances and difficulties that have to be handled in legislation. And indeed, I would argue in this way, it would also benefit the government. A modern Chamber of Representatives also needs to be fairly elected. How many times have we heard someone sigh in the radio, in the pub, and moan that politicians are all the same, that nothing ever changes, and that one candidate will inevitably win, so there is no point in even engaging. There has been so much optimism in Parliament since the general election and new members have been returned. I want to ensure that we spread that optimism out to each and every voter, a sense that they matter, that politics and Parliament is for them. And I do have to say that a fair voting process is the absolute basic step that we need to take. I heard the Honourable Member for Ashford's comments earlier in the debate. I can assure him that the Liberal Democrats have only for the first time actually delivered the number of MPs that is reflective of the voter share that they had in the general election. We'll await the outcome of the Electoral Commission's report on the most recent election before we draw any conclusions, especially when it comes to voter turnout. But in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I and my party look forward to engaging further with the Modernisation Committee, and I would urge the Leader of the House not to narrow its remit. Modernising this place is a big job, but it's surely a worthwhile one, because if we can get that right, we rebuild the trust that underpins our democracy and make the laws and the policies that come from this place all the better for it. Thank you.
I now call Jack Abbott to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Congratulations and welcome to your place. I've been moved and inspired by so many contributions over the past few days, and it is an immense privilege to be making the first maiden speech of today. And could I also offer particular best wishes to the Honourable Member for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich, who I know will also be making his maiden speech today. Not only is my neighbour, but he's representing a place that's really close to my heart. I'm incredibly proud to be making my maiden speech as the new Member of Parliament for Ipswich. However, this isn't my first contribution in this House. Yesterday, I asked a question at PMQs highlighting the huge potential that Ipswich possesses, but that after 14 years of neglect, we desperately needed a government to support and help revive our town centre. However, corners of social media instead focused on a very gentle joke I had made, where I pointed out that my home county of Suffolk once again had a Premier League football team, unlike our friends north of the border in Norfolk. One keyboard warrior in particular took umbrage at that. His name was Ed Balls, and apparently he used to work here. He said that Norwich had had a 15-year unbeaten run in the Old Farm Derby, a run that will now sadly be extended due to Ipswich being promoted to the Premier League and Norwich getting knocked out in the playoffs last season. I'm sure it will be a bitter pill for town fans to swallow as they visit Anfield, the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, the Etihad and Old Trafford next season. Ed's tweet also represented my most significant celebrity beef on social media since Steve Brookstein, yes, the first winner of the X Factor nearly a decade ago. Madam Deputy Speaker, Ipswich has a rich and long history. So rich and long, in fact, that I'm going to use this as an opportunity to settle an old score. Now that Colchester has vacated its town status, I am now laying claim to Ipswich being the oldest continuous town in England. No, I have not checked this by the House of Commons Library, as they might have given me an answer that I didn't particularly want to hear, but 2 minutes of searching online tells me that I've got a decent chance of being right. And I presume that now I'm stating this as fact in Parliament, it now becomes true. Thomas Wolsey is arguably Ipswich's most famous son, and we in Ipswich have been celebrating his legacy throughout the past year through the Wolsey 550. Wolsey doesn't always get the praise he deserves. Climbing the greasy pole won't win you many friends, as members of this House will attest to, I'm sure. However, his story rising from humble beginnings to becoming one of the most powerful statesmen in England was remarkable, and he left his imprint on our town too. And Ipswich can also lay claim to Ray Fiennes, Constance Andrews, Thomas Gainsborough, Jean Inglow, Brian Eno, Edith Cook, and even Richard Iowadi, to name a few. And my job over the coming years will be ensuring that kids growing up in Ipswich today get their chance to make their dreams a reality. So when my successor comes to do their maiden speech, they have a few more names to mention too. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would also like to mention my predecessor, Tom Hunt. While an MP, Tom often spoke about being neurodiverse and was open about some of the challenges he faced growing up. In doing so, Tom looked to tackle some of the stigma that still exists, and that is an incredibly powerful thing for a Member of Parliament to do. On election night, Tom charitably mentioned our shared commitment to improving the lives of children with special educational needs and disabilities, and is an issue that I have campaigned on for many years in Suffolk, and I'll now use my role to fight for those families here in Westminster. The SEND crisis is a national issue, and I know many colleagues from across the House would have heard countless stories about the struggles families have had to endure to access the services that should be theirs. In Suffolk, we have had a decade of the most grotesque and repeated failures. I remember 5 years ago, after another damning report, the front page of our local newspaper, the East Anglian Daily Times, showed the faces of just some of the children and the families who had been so badly failed by a broken system, with the heartbreaking, desperate headline, "We must be heard." As ITV's report shows today, so little has changed half a decade later. Those children and their families have still not been heard. And this isn't just about the educational impacts on children, immense though they may be. It is also about the exhaustion, the desperation, the isolation that families suffer day in, day out. The months, years even, battling for an education healthcare plan. The time spent waiting by the phone or checking emails, hoping that they might finally get some positive news. The energy that you have to find just to try and navigate this broken system, to fight through tribunals, to submit mountains upon mountains of new documentation and information, all the while trying to care for your family. As a Labour government, we cannot let the suffering of vulnerable children and their families continue, and it will be my personal mission in this place to fight this inequality and injustice. And if I can make one final plea on this issue, Madam Deputy Speaker, as a former teaching assistant and a proud G&B MP, can I urge that when we're talking about the crisis in retention and recruitment of teachers, we're also including specialist and support staff in the conversation. Yeah. They are crucial to breaking down the barriers of opportunity too. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would also like to touch on another subject incredibly important to me, the energy transition. This isn't just an environmental necessity, but an economic imperative too. It can boost our economy, reduce bills, ensure greater security and deliver the well-paid jobs that we need. And with GB Energy, we'll be able to achieve this. And if Britain is to become a world leader in this area, as the Labour Party have pledged, I want Ipswich and Suffolk to be right at the heart of this national renewal. And why shouldn't we be? Over the coming years, thousands of jobs will be created in new nuclear at Sizewell, offshore wind and in solar. And I'm unapologetically ambitious for our town and our county. I don't want those jobs and that investment to drift away elsewhere. I want kids growing up in Ipswich or people looking to retrain and upskill to get those secure, well-paid jobs. I want local businesses to benefit from the billions of pounds that are going to be flowing out of these projects. And I want our area to be the centre of national excellence. That is our future if we are brave enough to grasp it. And as a Labour and Cooperative Member of Parliament too, it's particularly welcome that our commitment to community energy sits at the very heart of this mission. The greatest ever expansion of community projects delivering 1 million new owners of energy will be genuinely transformational. And as a proud Cooperative Party MP, I will be championing the growth of such projects so local people will benefit from our green transition too. Madam Deputy Speaker, many of us are just a few weeks into our new role, and as this particular debate is about second jobs, I'll be honest in my contribution and say that I have no idea why or how any Member of Parliament would have a second job. Yeah, we all know what we're talking about here. To be the Member of Parliament for Ipswich is the greatest privilege of my life, but to be frank, it is not like any other job. I think about Ipswich, and I think about its beautiful award-winning parks. Its waterfront looking absolutely glorious on a sunny day. The music festivals I would have loved to have been to as a teenager and that we now have only slightly older than I was then. The fact that our town once again has a Premier League football club, I might have mentioned that already. But I think about Suffolk too, the place I moved to 25 years ago. I still hang out with my friends from Debenham High School. I still play for the same cricket club, the mighty Iron District Cricket Club. My batting just as terrible and my bowling just as slow, if not slower. I still want to walk around Fram Castle and along the beaches of Southwold, Aldborough and Dunwich. And I still pop into Co's, a family business founded nearly 100 years ago. And I love nothing better than eating at the Lighthouse restaurant or drinking an Adnams or an Aspel's at the Woolpack or the Greyhounds. And I'm still surrounded by my friends here, my family, my neighbours, not to mention a million happy memories, having been shaped and inspired by them for nearly a quarter of a century. And I have no doubt I will make some mistakes along the way, and I know there will be some times when my constituents disagree with me. But know that everything I do here will be out of service, friendship and love for my home, Ipswich and Suffolk. Thank you.
I now call Lincoln Jopp for his maiden speech.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I join with others in welcoming you to this place? And for giving me the chance to make this important maiden speech and contribution to the debate on second jobs, and I speak for the people of Spelthorne. Can I pay tribute to all the members that have made their maiden speeches, and in particular to my immediate predecessor, the member for Ipswich. He is clearly going to be a fearsome and fearless advocate for his constituents, based purely on the fact that he's prepared to risk the opprobrium of the people of Colchester, the people of Norwich, and perhaps most impressively of all, Mr. Ed Balls. So I congratulate him. Can I also thank the House staff for the impeccable welcome that they gave us all as new members. I was for quite a long time a soldier, so I was brought up on the mantra that 2 minutes early is 3 minutes late. And so no surprise that at 5 minutes to 7 on the Monday after the election, I was the first in the queue at the top of the ramp. I saw the two armed police officers, but there was also a doorkeeper, resplendent in his uniform of mourning coat and gold badge and beard. Not knowing what to expect, I approached him, and he said, "Good morning, Mr. Jopp." I was beyond impressed. He continued, "You might not recognise me under this beard, sir, but I'm Matt, and I was with you in the Scots Guards in Afghanistan." I went from being impressed to being deeply touched. Having had the chance to listen to a large number of maiden speeches, I've noticed that when the name of the member and their constituency flashes up on the screen, it is sometimes met with a knowing smile, and sometimes not, depending on the name of the seat. It is like that excellent episode of Yes, Prime Minister, when Jim Hacker and Sir Humphrey Appleby start discussing somewhere called St George's Island. Both of them press to have both of them suggest that they have some form of superior insight into St George's Island, when it quickly becomes apparent that neither of them have any idea where on earth it is. Lest my maiden speech become something like that, I thought I ought to tell you where Spelthorne is. Spelthorne is everything south of Heathrow Airport until you get to the Thames. We are in the administrative county of Surrey and the historic county of Middlesex. We are inside the M25, but not in London. Crazily, you can use an Oyster card to take a London bus there, but not the train. We are outside the clutches of the Mayor of London's dreaded ULEZ charge. But according to the Church of England, we report to the Bishop of Kensington. Madam Deputy Speaker, honourable members might think that with all these special circumstances might give rise to something of an identity crisis for the people of Spelthorne, but not a bit of it, because no one who lives there actually calls it Spelthorne anyway. Instead, people say that they live in Staines, Stanwell or Stanwell Moor, in Ashford or Shepperton or Laleham, in Halliford, Charlton Village or Sunbury. And, by the way, all honourable members sitting here today, thanks to a notable resident of Stanwell, Thomas, later Lord Knivet. It was he whom the King dispatched to search the cellars beneath Parliament, resulting in the capture of the treacherous gunpowder plotters. Clearly, Lord Knivet's ability to navigate this place was a great deal better than mine. I pay fulsome tribute to my immediate predecessor, as the Member of Parliament for Spelthorne, Kwasi Kwarteng, who represented the constituency since 2010. Honourable members will not be surprised to hear that his name came up frequently on the doorstep in the last general election. Kwasi was a much-respected backbencher and minister, as well as being a charismatic performer in this chamber, a strong advocate for small businesses in Spelthorne, He instigated the Spelthorne Small Business Plan competition, now in its 10th year. Spelthorne people are some of the hardest working people in the country, so it is appropriate that I should be making this speech in a debate on second jobs. Lots of my constituents have them. I too have had a selection of jobs. As a friend of mine recently remarked, blimey, Lincoln, 25 years in the army and 10 years in private equity. Where did you see more violence? And I am now in Parliament with the huge honour of representing the people of Spelthorne. I am struck just how important this is, particularly at the moment. I'm sure that all members want to be a strong voice for their constituents and local champion for their area. I do too, passionately. But we are also here to fulfil our second jobs, to make thoughtful contributions to the national and international debate on issues of great moment. None more important, in my view, than the defence of the realm, when the world is at its most dangerous that it's been since the Cold War. We are having a defence review, which will take time, when time may be running out, and the right course of action in terms of increasing defence expenditure is all too clear now, let alone in the 12 months' time when the Defence Review reports. Can I gently suggest to all members of this House that to govern may be to choose, but it is also to act, and that the answer to autocracy is rarely more bureaucracy. But on a lighter note, and to finish, Madam Deputy Speaker, honourable members now know, I hope, a little bit more about Spelthorne. You are welcome to visit any time, whether to hear about the work of BP's Global Technology Centre as it seeks to decarbonise the world, or because honourable members want to come to the largest film studios in Europe and the second biggest in the world after Hollywood. You might instead be interested in having a flutter on the horses at Kempton Park. Not that we are allowed to bet on this side of the House anymore. Or maybe just potter along the Thames like three men in a boat. Madam Deputy Speaker, I said I would finish, and I do not make promises I cannot keep. I made one promise to the people of Spelthorne. It was that if they elected me, then we would move to the constituency. Well, thanks solely to the efforts of my amazing wife, Caroline, we picked up the keys to our new home in Spelthorne on Tuesday, and will have moved there by the end of the weekend. This is the first promise I have kept to the people of Spelthorne. I look forward, as I serve them, to there being many more.
I now call Shaun Davies to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a real privilege to be speaking on my maiden speech with you in the chair today, and it's been a delight to follow the honourable member for Spelthorne and my honourable friend from Ipswich. I can't promise that my speech will be as witty as theirs, but I do support a proper Premier League team in Manchester United. It is an honour. I lost the house already. It's an honour to be making my maiden speech as the very proud MP for my hometown of Telford. Telford is where I was born, raised, and now bring up my own family. I am Telford and proud. I want to begin by talking about those MPs who I follow. My predecessor, Lucy Allen, who worked on many notable causes. I particularly want to pay tribute to her tireless work in respect of the Post Office scandal and pay tribute to her constituency team who supported the residents of Telford over the last 9 years. And I'd also like to mention and thank my friend and mentor, my immediate Labour predecessor, David Wright, who served our town and this House with passion over the last 14 years. And I'd also like to pay tribute to the first person to hold the job as MP for Telford, a great supporter and crucial advisor to me. He now sits in the other place, Lord Bruce Grocott. Lord Grocott led me on a tour of this house in 1997 when I was just 11 years old. Now, honourable members and right honourable members may be forgiven for thinking I look too old now to have been 11 in 1997. But Madam Deputy Speaker, that's what 14 years in local government does to you. Telford is a new town in Shropshire, a town which has grown significantly since its designation as a new town in 1963. A town that has a proud history and strong local identity. We are the home to the West Midlands' only World Heritage Site, the Iron Bridge Gorge, the true place of the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. And we have a long-established communities like Madeley, Oakengate and Dawley, which were recorded in the Domesday Book, with other proud communities too. I am a son, yes, of Telford, but of Dawley too, the birthplace of Captain Matthew Webb, the first man to swim the English Channel in 1875. His monument in Dawley High Street says, "Nothing great is easy." And Telford is great, but over recent years we certainly have not had it easy. Despite the challenges that Telford has faced, just like our own world champion boxer Liam Davies, Telford has continued to punch above its weight. We've delivered housing growth and economic growth. We have outstanding education with outstanding primary schools, first-class secondary schools, homes to Thomas Telford School, and the state-of-the-art further education and higher education facilities with Telford College and Harper Adams University in the centre of Telford. We have a record number of green and protected spaces. In fact, if honourable members would like to come and visit Telford, joining the 3.2 million people who do each and every year, you'll notice just how green we are. We are home to millions, and I mean millions of trees. We are known as a forest city. In Telford, we are incredibly proud to be home to some of the biggest defence companies. Right now, Telford residents are working on the tanks that are destined for Ukraine, and they are distributing essential equipment from uniform to morphine that will be deployed across all parts of the world to our brave armed forces. And our relationship with the armed forces is deep and strong. We are the home to over 8,000 veterans. My own family have served in all three services, and as a council, we became one of the first authorities to be awarded an MOD Gold accreditation for our work on the military covenant. And it's for the past 8.5 years, I've served as leader of the council, and we've done a lot over that time. The regeneration of our town centre, the creation of Southwater. We have been a business-winning, business-supporting council. We are the home to Bez Blocks, who provides bricks to almost every house-building company across the country. Avaramp, that provides accessible access to planes on airports across the world. And also we provide wheelie bins to most households in the country. We've also kept our council tax low, amongst the lowest of all councils in England, and we've supported children with our outstanding children's services, delivered exceptional adult services, and have been leaders within our sectors. As well as being a council leader, I've led Labour in local government. I've chaired the Cross-Party Local Government Association. Indeed, I'm proud to be the first former chair of the LGA to sit in this place rather than the one down the corridor. Yay. And I welcome members from right across the House, members and friends who have served as councillors and council leaders into this Parliament. In Telford, like the rest of the country, poverty and child poverty is increasing. It is heartbreaking to know, with almost 1 in 4 children living in poverty. For me, this is not an academic issue, it's personal. I was in poverty as a child. I remember switching the lights off in our council house and laying on the floor as debt collectors would bang on our door. I remember the embarrassment of queuing for a blue free school meal ticket as many of my friends got their paid yellow ones. That deep down imposter syndrome that remains with me today, and I can say, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's very much with me today. For too long, towns like Telford have had their contributions to housing and job growth banked, but the desperately needed investment and support required to break the cycle of poverty not arriving. And despite the housing growth, over the past 14 years, we've not had the investment that we need either. The closure of our A&E and the relocation of our consultant-led women's and children's unit as an example. And I say to my constituents, I will never stop fighting to bring services back to Telford. I also want to pay tribute to Telford Crisis Support. They work alongside the community to provide 238,624 meals last year, up by 21% on the year before. They also provide clothes, nappies and the very basics in life, offering a vital lifeline to families. Families come in many different shapes and sizes. From the age of 11, I live with my nan, Betty, who is and was my guiding star. Although I live with my nan from such a young age, my parents have always been there for me too. And I was lucky to have people like my great auntie Dill, who provided me with the financial support which meant I could be the first person to go to university, to read law and to qualify as a solicitor. I'm so lucky now to have my own family. I'm a proud dad and stepfather to Evan, Millie and Owen. My wife Elise and I see no distinction in our family. As part of a role as a counsellor is to be a corporate parent. Those in state care should be considered as part of all of our families. In Telford, 423 young people are in our care, and we support 249 care leavers. When I was the chair of the LGA, I described the local government sector as the corporate uncles and aunties of those children in care and those who left care. What is this house? What are members of Parliament to those children in state care? Maybe, just like my auntie, we are the corporate great aunties and uncles with resources, influence and wisdom. But what can we do more to support our children in care? And I say to children living in council homes or in temporary accommodation or in our care, who are picking up free school meals, food parcels and avoiding debt collectors, if I can get here, so can you. Yeah. To provide a better future to all of our children, we must reform our public sector. Yes, for some, a dry subject, but it is the only way that we can fix our broken system. Reform is vital and prevention is key. The longer-term approach of investing £1 now that saves hundreds of pounds many times over. Madam Deputy Speaker, the first 1,000 days of a child's life, invested in, focused on, can lead to better life outcomes and massive savings to the public purse. We must always ask ourselves, how can public services best serve the public? The answer is so often in the users of those services and those who work within them. When those who have skin in the game are empowered and trusted, the results are always better. And we know this so well in Telford, with the recent work of Holly, Scarlett and Joanne. For too many, our country does not work for them. They are not only disconnected, but they feel a million miles away from this place. This allows others to exploit the void, to divide us. We, all of us, together, despite political differences, should help connect this place to our citizens, so that democracy does not just survive, but it thrives. And I hope I can work on this nationally in the coming months and years. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to thank the people of Telford for trusting me with this incredible honour, the privilege of representing my hometown. I will stand up for Telford and I will stand up for them. I know we have a long road ahead of us, but I'm committed to that challenge, because after all, nothing great is easy.
Honourable and right honourable members will be conscious there's still a number wishing to get in, so unfortunately I'm going to put a 6-minute time limit on from the next speaker, but obviously those making their maiden speeches will be exempt from that. Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and welcome to your position as the new Deputy Speaker. And can I also congratulate the honourable member from Telford who made an excellent and very detailed maiden speech. No doubt he will be very successfully representing his constituents in Telford. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am the only member of the House in the chamber today that in the 2019 Parliament served on both the Committees of Standards and Privileges. All of the other MPs, bar one, are no longer in this chamber. And the amount of work that we had to deal with in the last Parliament was substantial, onerous and unprecedented. And so I'd like to begin my speech by welcoming the comments that the Leader of the House has made and broadly supporting
the motions that she has brought before the House, but there are a couple of points that I would like to make that I hope she will take in the spirit of assistance, which is what they're intended to do. Briefly, in the time allocated to me, if I can turn firstly to the motion on curbing some elements of a second job in terms of parliamentary advice. What the leader may not be aware of is the background to where that proposal first came. In November 2021, the Standards Committee published a report. It was the fourth report of the session, and annexed to that report under Annex 7 were comments made by the then Commissioner for Parliamentary Standards. And the Standards Committee, myself and my colleagues, thoroughly looked at the matter on a cross-party basis, and we concluded that we would want to probably recommend the banning of paid parliamentary advice or consultancy. And we looked at the House of Lords wording, because that's the wording that the then Commissioner had first looked at, and the wording is broadly identical to the wording that we currently have. So in our report on May 2022, we came forward with our proposal that the banning of paid parliamentary advice should align with the House of Lords code. So my question to the leader is it her intention to ensure that in the other place their code is amended so that we do not have an oddity where, for instance, a Labour peer can carry on with the proposal that she has before us to ban, whereas an MP here wouldn't be able to do that? That would not be what the objectives of the Standards Committee were when we first proposed this. It would be very helpful in her summing up if she could confirm that the appropriate mirror changes will be made in the House of Lords. Now, I'd like to turn briefly to the other, much more substantial motion. And I'm sorry that there's a time limit on, because I had many things to say about this. But in the very short period that I've got, I'll restrict my comments. We should remember as a House, and the member for North East Fife touched on this, that the Standards Committee is unlike any other select committee in the House of Commons, because half of its membership are lay members. These are people who are not members of Parliament. The total membership of 14 means that if you take out the chair voting, the lay members have a substantive jurisdiction on that committee. And I'm sure those lay members watching today, as many will undoubtedly be, I cannot believe it's the government's intention to create a committee that will be looking at standards, even at a strategic level, which excludes lay members. Because I know that the leader, when she was on this side of the House, was a strong believer in having lay members on the committee. So will she carefully look again at her proposal and not only take into account the balance of political parties, but importantly, at least when it's discussing standards issues, this new committee, that it has lay member representation on it? My proposal would be that the 7 current lay members of the Standards Committee perhaps could elect from their number 1 member to sit on that committee. The other points that I wanted to make were made by the shadow leader, and I don't propose to rehearse them. Suffice to say that the leader said that the chair of standards, chair of administration, etc., would be guested onto the committee. What we have to ensure, if this committee is to be an effective body that can deliver change, as the leader hopes, is that these people aren't simply guested onto it, that experience, knowledge is somehow brought in, perhaps as ex officio members rather than full voting members. But I would suggest that she looks again at that proposal and perhaps make some welcome comments at the end. In conclusion, I would say that this is a welcome proposal, but I do urge the leader to look carefully at bringing on lay members onto that committee.
Thank you. Murray to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's a great honour to make my maiden speech today as you take your first day in the chair following your election. And it's also a great honour to follow the excellent maiden speeches that we've heard today, the members for Ipswich, Spelthorne and Telford. They have made excellent and intimidatingly good maiden speeches. I can see that keeping up with them will be a full-time job. I come here from Edinburgh East and Musselburgh, and the constituency I represent is geographically small, but it is extremely diverse, comprising city centre, suburb, town and village. It stretches from the historic centre of Edinburgh along the Forth Coast and is unrivalled in both its natural and architectural beauty. It encompasses Niddry and Loch End, hard-working communities of people who contribute much but would contribute yet more if opportunity allowed. People with their talents and industry to offer, but held back not just by a lack of work, but by a lack too of secure working conditions. There are lots of second jobs there. Where organisations like the Greenhouse Pantry in Craigmillar help people keep their heads above water in the cost of living crisis. The constituency also plays home to the diverse, vibrant communities of Abbey Hill, Southside and Leith Links, full of excitement and ambition, but held back by a housing crisis. Edinburgh has seen the sharpest rent increases in Europe. And through Duddingston and Craigentinny, the street stretches to Portobello and Joppa, Edinburgh's seaside, where groups like the Porty Water Collective are fighting the scandal of sewage in our seas. And I also represent Musselburgh, the honest town, perfectly sandwiched between capital, countryside and coast, and where at last weekend I attended the kirking and sashing of this year's honest lad and lass, Billy Innes in Ailey Bothran. My constituency is home to two universities, the University of Edinburgh at one end and Queen Margaret University at the other. This makes the seat both intellectually dynamic and young. Students and recent graduates make their home there, and their ideas, skills and energy make them the engine for my constituency's enormous potential. I have been struck by the contribution of these young people. When the pandemic came, they were the group least at risk from the virus, but they unhesitatingly sacrificed so many moments in their lives to protect others. Arguably, no generation has given up so much for another since the war. But to my mind, their sacrifice has not been adequately acknowledged, never mind compensated. In this Parliament, we must secure for them well-paid, interesting jobs in the industries of the future, decent, affordable housing, and a climate that is not disintegrating before their eyes. In the past, events in my constituency have ricocheted out across the world. The fiery debates of the Reformation and the rational arguments of the Enlightenment were incubated in my seat in centuries past. Nevertheless, I am convinced our best days lie ahead. Because my community has all the raw material for a vibrant, dynamic century. The universities and their research spin-offs in fintech and biotech, innovative startups in their hundreds, and the huge opportunities in the energy transition and green technology are all to be found there. If we are to have the economic growth the government is aiming for, then I would say my constituency could be a powerhouse of it. And incorporating, as it does, the historic old town of Edinburgh, culture, hospitality and tourism form our economic backbone. Not least in August, when my constituency plays host to the Edinburgh International Festival and Fringe. Am I correct, Madam Deputy Speaker, in thinking that the convention is MPs must inform another member when they visit the seat? In that case, I expect my mailbox to melt down when everyone comes to the Edinburgh Festival next month. Of course, everyone is most welcome. The Edinburgh Fringe is known for its world-class performances, but also for amateurs trying to get attention by saying something shocking. So the Conservative leadership contenders will fit right in. While my constituency has many castles, theatres and museums, the most important building in the seat, indeed in Scotland, lies at the foot of the Royal Mile in the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood. That is where the lifeblood of the Scottish political heart beats. And that's why it's fitting I make my maiden speech as we discuss how to modernise Parliament. It is safe to say that relations between this Parliament and that one have not been good these last 10 years. That must change. So I was heartened to hear in the King's speech an agenda that will address that, just as I was when the Prime Minister's first visit was to my constituency. That speaks to a new era in Scottish politics, of respect, constructive engagement and delivery, and I look forward to playing my part in it. Because as society changes, so the parliaments that represent them must change too, both in their members and in their practices. This Parliament is breaking new ground in how it represents modern Britain, not just in the first woman Chancellor and a woman Deputy Prime Minister and 190 Labour women MPs, but more minorities, more LGBT representative and more state-educated MPs. I'm glad that in the latter two I am adding to the tally. My generation grew up with Scottish devolution. Having two parliaments is a fact of life for us. With the Scottish Parliament now 25 years old, there is much that this place can learn from Holyrood. And reciprocally, there are things that Holyrood can learn from here. No parliament has a monopoly on modernisation. It is something to which we must all continually strive. And I'm pleased to see the MSP for Edinburgh and the Lothians, Sarah Boyack, in the gallery. I have had learned much from her and will continue to do so. So let our two parliaments cooperate and learn from each other so that they make each other better in synergy and symbiosis rather than with rancour and anger. Let us remember as we modernise here that this is one of several parliaments and assemblies in this land. And while I'm discussing Scottish politics, let me pay tribute to my predecessor. Tommy Shepherd was an assiduous and dedicated constituency MP, and for that he is held in high regard by many in Edinburgh. And in this place, he was a dedicated champion of peace and justice in the Middle East. While he and I may take different views on constitutional questions, I hope my constituents will find continuity on both those scores. And I must also pay tribute to my predecessor before him. Sheila Gilmore has been dedicated to improving the lives of people for Edinburgh, particularly the poorest, for many decades, including 5 years in this House. Her commitment to the community, even years after leaving office, is astounding. Rarely, I think, has a new member been so supported by their predecessor as I have been by her. Madam Deputy Speaker, the coming years will be critical for my constituency. If we can generate economic growth by attracting the jobs of the future, if we can ensure people who work hard get good wages and decent conditions, if we can seize the opportunity of the energy transition, bring opportunities for the young, and take our place as a global cultural capital, then we can achieve our potential. For all its attributes, given the challenges we face, my community needs a government focused on its priorities. In fact, it needs both its governments and both its parliaments to do that. For both our parliaments to modernise to meet the demands of today and not be distracted by the arguments of decades past. For members of both parliaments to learn from each other's practices, spurring each other on. For both parliaments to compete in claiming credit for improvements in people's lives and not in casting blame for what's gone wrong. For my part, Madam Deputy Speaker, I mean to be an MP for use and not for show. So everything I do in this place will be aimed at deploying the power of government to unleash the untapped potential of my constituency. Thank you.
I now call Blake Stevenson to make his maiden speech.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. Congratulations on your election and for taking your place. And thank you for the warm welcome to the Chamber. I'm grateful for being called to do my maiden speech in this debate on second jobs and modernisation of this Parliament. It's a tricky but important subject, so in preparation I thought I'd flick through Erskine May. So I popped into the library the other day and did so, and swiftly fell asleep. So I came to the very swift conclusion that a bit of modernisation in this House would not go amiss. And so members should find that I engage in that debate constructively and thoughtfully as we think about how this Parliament and future Parliaments should progress. I first congratulate the honourable member for, and I must look, Edinburgh East and Musselburgh, and I've probably not pronounced that correctly, and I do apologise not only to the member but also to all constituents. But thank you for that whistle-stop tour of that constituency, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think I should take up the offer and go to Edinburgh in August over recess. And also thank you for all the excellent maiden speeches that have come before us. Members have set a very high bar, which bodes well for this Parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure all newly elected members feel as I do, that we have been given a great honour in being elected. I feel that most strongly because Mid-Bedfordshire has been my home for 10 years, so I'm deeply grateful to the electors who placed their faith in me at the ballot box. Prior to being elected, Madam Deputy Speaker, I had a 15-year career in the city where I was responsible for compliance and conduct, keeping over-enthusiastic traders and lightning-sharp minds in check, ensuring they stuck to the rules, though perhaps not with your aplomb. Within the constituency, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are many people doing fantastic work in public service, running businesses, farming, investing for the future in their community or their family, or both. I'm here to support them all in their aspirations by championing our dynamic economy and opportunities for all. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me start by paying tribute to my predecessor, the now Honourable Member for Hitchin, a Bedfordshire lad who returned from London last year to win the long and hard-fought by-election in our county. After working as a maths teacher and at the Bank of England, the honourable gentleman became the first Labour MP to represent Mid-Bedfordshire. He should be very proud of that achievement. And of course, I should be very proud if he remains the last Labour Member of Parliament for Mid-Bedfordshire. Except for that recent interruption, Madam Deputy Speaker, Mid-Bedfordshire, in its various guises, has been represented in this place by Whig, Liberal and Conservative MPs. I have some big shoes to fill. Lord Boyd, who represented the constituency from 1931, was a leading advocate for decolonisation and served in Churchill's post-war government. Stephen Hastings helped create the circumstances that led to the first steps towards the independence of Zimbabwe. And more recently, Lord Lisle, who I believe is still the longest-serving government law officer, was a member up to 1997. Samuel Whitbread even represented parts of the constituency, though I believe he may be more famous for founding a moderately successful brewery. Mr. Speaker, many people pass through Bedfordshire on one of our major roads or railway lines, sadly without a second's thought for the county. Though lying within one of the smallest counties in England, Mid-Bedfordshire has within its borders a beautiful and varied landscape. Outstanding chalk escarpments offer stunning views across the county. The Sundon Hills, the Sharp and Hoe Clappers, I don't know what a clapper is, and the Pegston and Barton Hills. Stretching for 40 miles, the Greensand Ridge offers spectacular high-level walking. And in the community forest of Marston Vale, one of only 13 in the UK, trees are being planted in the pits dug to supply clay to the nearby Stuartby brickworks. A great example of how we can restore and enhance our local and natural environment. Whilst commuters may blink and miss it, Madam Deputy Speaker, constituents are deeply passionate about our beautiful countryside, our communities and our heritage. That's why proposals to build thousands of homes on greenbelt land near Barton-le-Clay, Silsoe and Gravenhurst have been met with stiff resistance from local action groups, as have proposals to concrete over Steppingley Road Field, a site on the edge of Flitwick, home to skylarks, deer, badgers and hares, and sitting alongside semi-ancient woodland. Similar concerns exist throughout mid-Bedfordshire, whether in Greenbelt or not, and those communities have my full support. Let's remind ourselves, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Greenbelts are a Labour policy, a policy I'm happy to support, but not if, in the words of Lord Prescott, it's one they intend to build on. Mr. Speaker, as beautiful as mid-Bedfordshire is, it is not a sleepy hollow. Within easy reach of Cambridge, Oxford and London, we host the world-class Cranfield University, numerous start-up technology companies, a Nissan research and development site, the Millbrook Proving Ground, if you fancy a nice trip on a wobbly road, the Lockheed Martin, a significant defence partner, working hard to keep us all safe at night. We are home to a vibrant, high-tech economy and boundless opportunities to get on. And I hope to spend time in this house and at home, ensuring our economy is working for young people from modest backgrounds like mine. Let me conclude my tour of Bedfordshire by mentioning our county's son, John Bunyan. He was the legendary Puritan evangelist, so not quite man after my own heart. He was famous for writing The Pilgrim's Progress, whilst incarcerated for preaching without a licence in the 17th century. After the Bible, his novel is said to be the most published book in the English language. That's a record that one former member for mid-Bedfordshire is perhaps intent on challenging. And no doubt, if a ban on second jobs for members comes to pass, members, all sides of this House, may find that they also have a natural flair for writing similarly successful fiction. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are a large intake of new members. We have an opportunity to challenge the status quo and to breathe fresh life into our politics. Modernisation must be thoughtful, reflecting a consensus that emerged, certainly in my election campaign, that our politics must improve. But we must recognise that this place needs the experience and knowledge that comes from working in industry, commerce, law, and yes, even in politics, lest we become a house of politicians interested only in the next election, the next poll, the next headline. That is not what the people out there want. They want a competent government to address the issues they are concerned about. They want an effective opposition to hold that government to account. And I will play my full role in scrutinising the plans that come forward to ensure that the Parliament that I am so proud to be a member of embodies the standards in public life that the people of mid-Bedfordshire and across the country expect. Thank you.
Alex Barros-Curtis to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome you to your place. And thank you for allowing me to make my first contribution to this House in this important debate. In my previous role, I was proud to play my part in changing the Labour Party, and so it is apt that I give my maiden speech as we discuss changing and modernising this House. May I also associate myself with comments of my honourable friends and honourable members and congratulate all those giving their maiden speeches both today and over the last few days. It is a privilege to stand here as the newly elected Member of Parliament for Cardiff West, and it is not an exaggeration to say that I stand in the shadow of some impressive individuals when it comes to my predecessors. I am the fifth individual since World War II to have the honour of representing Cardiff West, and of my four predecessors, 3 stood under the Labour banner and went on to forge formidable careers here in Westminster. 1 served as Speaker of this House. Rhodri Morgan my predecessor but one, served in this House for nearly 14 years, before then beginning his next act as First Minister of Wales, serving in that role for over 9 years. Rhodri was a political giant and somebody very much loved by my constituents and very much missed. And as for my immediate predecessor, Kevin Brennan, as well as serving in a number of ministerial roles in the last Labour government, his single biggest impact in this House might be his membership of the parliamentary rock band MP4. So we have a Speaker, a First Minister and a lead guitarist. Hey. For me, Madam Deputy Speaker, the pressure really is on. But in all seriousness, Kevin served the constituency of Cardiff West with distinction for 23 years, and he is a quality act to follow. This quality was clearly spotted by the House at the time Kevin gave his maiden speech on the 20th of June 2001. After he finished it, Peter Bottomley, who was the last Parliament's Father of the House, commented that Kevin, quote, will be one of the stars of the Parliament. He has the sort of speaking talent that probably guarantees his joining the Whip's office and being shut up for a bit. Mr. Bottomley was prescient because following the 2005 general election, Kevin was indeed appointed an Assistant Government Whip. So I want to place on record my thanks to Kevin and to his wife Amy for their generosity, advice and support. Having listened to a number of maiden speeches over the last few days of debate, I believe it has become a tradition to refer to one's constituency as the most beautiful in all the land. And as this is a place steeped in tradition, perhaps with a sprinkling of modernisation to come, I would not want to disappoint. So I can confirm that Cardiff West is indeed the most beautiful, or as we say in Welsh, prydferth or haf. Until this election, the constituency of Cardiff West consisted entirely within the boundaries of the city of Cardiff, but following the most recent set of boundary changes, the ward of Pontyclun in Rhondda and Taff now forms part of Cardiff West. Cardiff West's gain is Pontypridd's loss, as Pontyclun is a vibrant community full of good people and a thriving high street that we must strive to maintain. On that note, I want to thank my honourable friend, the member for Pontypridd, for her work representing Pontyclun in the last Parliament. Moving east, you will find a diverse and prydferth, haf, constituency. In one corner, you will find Llandaff, a city within a city that houses the beautiful Llandaff Cathedral, one of two cathedrals in Cardiff. In St Fagans, you will find the St Fagans National Museum of History, one of Europe's preeminent open-air museums. In Canton, a thriving cultural scene, including Chapter Arts Centre and the Corp. Cardiff West also regularly punches above its weight when it comes to sport. It is the home to Glamorgan Cricket at Sophia Gardens, the Athletics Stadium at Cardiff International Sports Stadium, and of course Cardiff City Stadium, the home of Cardiff City Football Club and the Welsh national team. Cardiff West also houses Riverside, Pontcanna, Fairwater and Pentrabane, Penturch, Rada and Morganstown, Gwaelod y Garth, Ely and Caira, to name but a few. And whilst each area is of course defined by its own unique character, Madam Deputy Speaker, the common thread that runs through them is of a proud community, replete with families, local activists, sport clubs, volunteers and faith leaders, all committed to serving the communities they call home. That is something that became clear to me during the election campaign, and as their newly elected Member of Parliament, I will work with anyone who genuinely seeks to support Cardiff West. In the last few days, the Labour government has set out its plans to deliver on the commitments we made to the British people at the last election. Throughout that election campaign, I met countless number of constituents who demanded change, but not just for change's sake. They wanted change with a purpose, change that would improve their lives, by making work pay, by delivering a new deal for working people, by rebuilding their broken public services, by making their streets safer, by offering a more inclusive and tolerant discourse, and by making an offer of a future for our country that is more positive, more hopeful, and more honest. Of course, for us to deliver that change, we must embody that change, and we need to only look around the room to see that. In this Parliament, 263 women were elected, representing a record high of just over 40%. This is also the most diverse Parliament by race, and this Parliament includes the largest cohort of LGBT+ members of any Parliament in the world. Yeah. Progress does not always move in a straight line, but if one looks around this chamber, and if one considers the tenor of maiden speeches we have heard in these last few days of debate, then there are indeed reasons for hope. At the outset of this new Parliament, this deserves special mention, because whilst we can disagree in politics, we should always strive to do so with decency, honesty and respect. Doing so is not a sign of weakness, but of confidence in ourselves. Being elected has been both thrilling and humbling in equal measure, and I'm sure many of my colleagues across both sides of the House have experienced not dissimilar thoughts and feelings. However, I am not blinded by the excitement of being elected to this great place to forget that it is not about me. It is about what I can and will do to repay the trust of my constituents and to fight for the causes that matter to them. Causes such as defending our arts and culture, particularly the cuts that threaten the existence of the Welsh National Opera, supporting our Welsh and Westminster governments to cut the levels of child poverty, to recruit the new teachers we need and to cut NHS waiting times, unlocking our green energy potential to deliver cheaper and greener energy, and by making work pay by delivering on that new deal for working people. Ultimately, of course, it's not just about what we each say, it's about what we do. And for so long as I am here, I will work hard for a stronger and fairer Cardiff West. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to thank those people but for whom I would not be here giving this maiden speech. The first thanks goes to my family, my mum, my dad and my sister. My family have inspired my values of public service and have made me a better person. The other thanks goes to my husband, who's up in the gallery with my sister. We celebrated our 6-year wedding anniversary during the final days of the campaign, but we actually met more than 12 years ago at a time when I was still struggling to acknowledge, let alone accept, that I was gay. Through all of that, he had the love and patience to support me in accepting who I was and to be honest about that. I truly would not be here without his love, support and friendship. So as a proud Welshman and a proud gay man, I am excited to play my part in the government's programme of national renewal, and in doing so, I will endeavour to represent Cardiff West to the very best of my abilities.
Ellie Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to welcome you to your place. And I'd like to pay tribute to the very moving and passionate maiden speeches that we've heard from across all sides of the House today. I think I probably haven't got time to go through all of the details of them, but I shall remember not to fall asleep in the library. And I recognise the passion with which many people have spoken about defending their constituents' interests and particularly tackling child poverty. I'd like to speak to the topic of this debate, the formal topic on the modernisation of the House, and very much welcome the Leader's initiative in setting up this committee and look forward to feeding into it in whatever way possible, including through this debate. For me, modernisation should be about how we can become more efficient and effective as a House, and therefore more productive in our role as MPs, which is what we have been elected to do. As I've already mentioned, I hope that the committee can be as representative as possible, and it strikes me in particular that since more than half of the MPs in this House are now newbie MPs, as indeed am I, perhaps there is an opportunity to ensure that the committee is balanced in that way, so that the voices of new MPs who are able to draw on a wide range of experience and perhaps have fresh eyes and can bring fresh insight, which I think was mentioned by one of the other maiden speeches. I'd really love to see that represented in the committee. So from my perspective as a newly elected member, I'd like to offer observations on 3 elements of how this House operates to contribute and feed into the deliberations of the committee. I'd like to speak about sitting, speaking and voting. Very kind of day-to-day activities that we have, despite only spending 3 weeks in this House already. These are observations that I know I share with others across all parts of the House, having had some conversations in the corridors about them. So, First of all, sitting. You know, we are in a chamber that is far too small for all of us to fit into. I know this is not a novel observation, but as a newly elected MP, it is really, really striking that this is quite extraordinary. I've served as a councillor for a number of years. I've served as a member of the European Parliament. In each of those chambers, you would have your own seat, you'd have your own desk, you'd be able to plug in your devices so that you could work off electronic materials. It seems really quite extraordinary that we do not have space in this chamber for each of us to sit and to speak. And indeed, I've been amazed to discover that there are seats in this chamber in which we can sit, but from which we cannot speak, which seems really quite extraordinary limitation on the ability of everybody to participate in our debates. So wouldn't that be wonderful if we all had somewhere to sit? The limitations on space also leads to some frankly rather ridiculous behaviour, such as the practice of having to queue up at the opening of the chamber to place a prayer card to book your seat, and at times of great demand, such as the King's speech or indeed PMQs, leads to this kind of contestation over space that simply wouldn't have to be there if we had enough space for everybody. And while I'm on the topic of prayers, you know, there is a practice in this place of Christian prayers. As the daughter of preachers, I am very familiar with this, but I would beg to suggest that perhaps in this day and age in which we are a country of all faiths and none, it might be time to consider taking an approach perhaps a little bit more like Radio 4's Thought for the Day, where a range of faiths are represented and there is an opportunity in that moment of reflection at the beginning of the day to hear views from a range of different faith perspectives and indeed from none. So to move on to speaking, I'm actually glad that there has been a time limit introduced for speeches today, because again, I'm used to speaking in chambers in which there is a time limit, and I think time limits aid the democratic process because they mean that everybody gets an equal chance at a fair crack of the whip at having their voice heard within the chamber. If we had more time limits, there would be more opportunity for people to participate, and perhaps MPs would be more keen to participate in debates here. But it's not just the time limit, it's the process of getting a slot. I have been busy bobbing up and down to attract your attention, Madam Deputy Speaker, as indeed I did last week for 5 solid hours without managing to attract the attention of the Speaker. And there have been a number of people in recent days who wanted to make their maiden speeches and not been able to do so. This practice of bobbing, while it might be good for the glutes, I suggest is not so good for democracy, and perhaps we could find a more efficient way of allocating speaking time. While we're on the topic of allocating time, the honourable member from the Lib Dems spoke about, you know, the process for government control or non-government control of speaking time. Again, that is an initiative to increase the backbench influence on the allocation of speaking time. I think that would be very, very useful. And my final point on speaking is on the culture in this House. I've witnessed everything from excessive deference to, frankly, braying in the few short days that I have spent in this chamber. And I think that, as others have made reference to in their maiden speeches, we really need to clean up politics. We really need to show that we are all here to debate in as positive a spirit as possible, as indeed the member for Cardiff West just referred to. Finally, voting. It's extraordinary to me that we do not have electronic voting. We have a semi-system. While I've been here, I've participated in 5 votes, and that's taken at least an hour and a quarter. If you added up each of those votes, it adds up to basically a month's worth of MP time. It is an utter waste of time, totally unproductive. We could be getting through far more. So let's get rid of the voting lobbies. We could double the physical size of the chamber if we got rid of the voting lobbies. That's a genuine practical suggestion. And take the opportunity of the decanting process and the newbie MPs to really modernise how we operate here. And my final point, if we want to be a truly modern House of Commons, proportional representation.
Maiden speech.
May I offer my congratulations and thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to make my maiden speech as the new member for Wolverhampton North East, especially in this fundamentally important debate, so we're not just a government of service, but we're a house of service. My maiden speech mentions many who have done precisely that, served others. It's a great pleasure to follow the honourable member for North Herefordshire and to hear such excellent maiden speeches across the House. It is an honour to serve the community where I was born, raised my family and have worked in local secondary schools as a science teacher and then deputy head teacher. I pay tribute to my predecessors, Jane Stevenson, and with parliamentary boundary changes, Eddie Hughes too. I thank them for their faithful service to our communities. I also wish to honour the late Ian Brookfield, former leader of Wolverhampton City Council, who sadly passed away at 57 after a short illness. Ian filled any room and was a political giant. His legacy of celebrating the diversity of our city and fighting for the vulnerable will not be forgotten. Just a mere glance of the roll call of previous MPs who have served Wolverhampton North East, you soon realise there are big shoes to follow. Jenny Lee, who was first elected as MP, was too young to vote. Jenny was instrumental in establishing the Open University. Ken Purchase, who served as MP for 18 years, a deeply respected constituency MP. Ken played a pivotal role in the campaign to save our beloved Wolverhampton Wanderers Football Club. Losing our club would have been devastating for the local community, not only in economic terms, but also our identity for a city who truly love our football club. Our returning member and honourable friend, Emma Reynolds, recently elected for Wickham. Emma was a minister in the last Labour government, and I know she will serve tirelessly in this government. The long and rich history of the constituency is a fascinating story of how a small village established in 985 AD grew into the wonderful, diverse city it is today. A history carved out of wars, plagues, economic booms and busts. A story of determined perseverance, progress and community cohesion. These values are testament to what makes any place great, its people. The dawn of the Industrial Revolution brought factories and canals to Wolverhampton and Willenhall. We were ideally located to become one of the major regions involved in coal and metal production, especially of locks, keys and enamelware. Growth in manufacturing with companies like Guy Motors, Goodyear's, Chubb and Yale lock makers. We were at the heart of the workshop of the world. If it was mechanical, we built it. My journey to stand here today started with my parents migrating from Fiji as young adults. I was born and raised on a council estate, Ashmer Park, watching my father work all hours in demanding jobs. Times were tough back then, but they shouldn't be that tough today. I directly encountered these challenges when I was honoured to serve as Mayoress of Wolverhampton as we emerged from COVID restrictions. I met extraordinary community groups and many remarkable people, including the first official free woman of the city, Lisa Potts. Lisa protected her students at a primary school nursery from being attacked by an armed intruder. Selflessly, Lisa placed herself in between young students and the attacker, suffering horrific, life-changing injuries in the process. George Medal recipient Lisa remains in close contact with many of the students almost 30 years after that horrific day. Her humanity, courage and compassion is a very definition of a hero. Wolverhampton and Willenhall take great pride in showing our gratitude to those serving in the British Armed Forces and veterans. We have extraordinary veteran community groups and volunteers, like Anne Partridge, Regimental Sergeant Major of the Staffordshire Regiment Association, a true leader known for getting things done. I was privileged to be part of unveiling the magnificent Saragari Monument, commemorating the brave last stand of 21 Sikh soldiers from the 36th British Sikh Regiment and one Muslim cook who valiantly fought for the British Army. Unity is strength, and we see a wonderful example when the Guru Nanak Gurdwara and St Thomas's Church worked together for Wensfield in Bloom, amassing several gold awards. I have seen firsthand the struggles families are facing every day in my former role as Deputy Head Teacher. I couldn't believe the normalisation of hardship. Schools have become the daily support hubs for families desperate in so many ways. Challenges that should be consigned to the dustbin of history. It is these experiences that have inspired me to stand and fight for better. I want every child to be able to take a seat at any table, regardless of their background. This Labour government will break down barriers to opportunity with free breakfast clubs in all primary schools, a reformed secondary curriculum which values creative subjects, a focus on skills needed by the future workforce, and a children's wellbeing bill, so children are safe, healthy, happy and treated fairly. When you consider the high levels of deprivation in the schools where I worked, I cannot speak highly enough of the dedicated staff, incredible students and supportive parents. Madam Deputy Speaker, my message to my students. I miss you. I am proud of you. Remember to find what you love and go for it with everything you have. Yeah. And finally, my humble thanks are to the electorate of Wolverhampton North East, who put their trust in me. To those who didn't vote for me, please know that I am here to serve you as well. The damage done will not be fixed overnight, but the work has started. I will serve all constituents to bring the change you deserve.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and congratulations to you and all your colleagues in your new roles. I wish you the very best of luck with dealing with all of us as we go through our time here. I'd like to congratulate the member for Wolverhampton for that excellent maiden speech, and particularly her passionate message to her students, who I am sure also miss her very much. I want to speak specifically about the motions that are on the order paper. There is a huge amount, I could say, about ways in which I think this House should be modernised, and I have been speaking and thinking for years about it. I think I'm probably one of the few members that has spent many hours poring over the standing orders, considering the best ways in which they could be changed in order for this House to be improved. Not many people are quite as geeky as I am about that, but I won't focus on that. I want to talk about specifically the motions as they are written today. The second jobs motion that is on the agenda, that has sort of been badged as a second jobs motion, it does relate to paid employment, but it doesn't, in my mind, relate to the paid employment that constituents think of when they think about second jobs. You know, when constituents are thinking about that, they're thinking about the people who are appearing on GB News on a weekly basis, which is not taken in by the changes that are proposed in this amendment. They're thinking about the people that are doing work for a financial institution, as my colleague from the Green Party said, which again is not taken in by this amendment. What this amendment to the rules does is really a good thing, but I think it has been badged wrongly, calling it about second jobs. What it does is it increases the level of transparency and restrictions that are required of members of Parliament who are using their privileged knowledge that they have as part of this position to then get paid employment. So it restricts that part of it. It restricts the fact that we all have knowledge of parliamentary procedure because we are in here. It restricts us then using that to get money, which I think is a laudable aim, but to me is not what the House needs and the changes that the House needs in order to fix the second jobs issue. I will, however, support the government's changes here, but I think it needs to go far further. In relation to the Modernisation Committee, I do have concerns about a number of things about the motion that's on the agenda, beginning with the remit. The remit is incredibly woolly. If you look at the remit for the Modernisation Committee, it's to consider reforms to House of Commons procedures, standards and working practices, and to make recommendations thereon. It's not to modernise the House of Commons, which I would have been much more supportive of. If you give the committee understanding that they need to drag this house actually into the 20th century would be helpful, never mind the 21st century. If you give the committee a remit that it's got to do that it has to make to increase the amount of modern working practices, to increase the ability of MPs to represent their constituents in Parliament, then that would be really helpful, but the remit is not there. It's just to make recommendations. So I'm disappointed that the government could have gone further in that regard. The issue about the makeup of members is really, really significant. And it's not just about the smaller parties, the parties that are not 1, 2 and 3 in this House, wanting to have a voice, but because of the way that the government has chosen to arrange this committee, the number of members it's chosen to have on it, they have guaranteed that there cannot be a Northern Irish member on the committee, because it will be divvied up between the Labour Party, the Conservatives and the Lib Dems. It will be divvied up. So there will never be a member from the DUP. There will never be somebody that's struggling with some of those geographical challenges that are unique to members from Northern Ireland on the committee making decisions around it. We would have liked an SNP seat on it. I'm pleased to hear what the Leader of the House has said around trying to ensure that all voices are heard. I would have, like the Shadow Leader of the House, really liked to have some more conversation with her beforehand about this, so that we could suggest what some of our views were on the best ways that our voices can be heard. If she really does want to work in that collegiate way, we are happy to do that, but this has unfortunately not got off to the most collegiate of starts. So if the government could consider the best ways to do that. So as I've said, I'm concerned about the geographical issue in relation to this. The Leader of the House also specifically spoke about the experiences of all members in this place. I would really like if the committee could consider to hearing from those MPs who are not currently in the House, who were former MPs, because they have also got a significant amount of experiences. It may be that we don't have MPs currently in the House with certain who have got certain disabilities, for example, but we did formerly. It may be that we've not got MPs in the House that have experienced the proxy voting system, but we did formally. I did a huge amount of work alongside the Procedure Committee, or with the Procedure Committee during the course of COVID. That committee met almost every day in some of the early days of lockdown online. We considered every single possible way to make the House COVID compliant and made a huge number of recommendations to the government, some of which could be incorporated in terms of making the House more modern as times go on. But if the government's going to, if the Modernisation Committee, is going to take evidence and expertise from any of those committees, which I'm pleased that the Leader of House committed that they will, there's still no SNP voice on any of those committees that will be feeding into the Modernisation Committee, because we're unlikely to get a seat on any of those committees. So it's all well and good taking the advice from all of these places, but again, the smaller parties are restricted in what we're being heard. So just lastly, I am happy to support the creation of this committee, but I would really appreciate if the Leader of the House would try and work in a slightly more collegiate way than has been done so far.
I call Neil Duncan Jordan to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to make my maiden speech in this debate. May I congratulate you on your recent election, and also congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Wolverhampton North East, for an excellent address, and look forward to hearing many more passionate and powerful contributions in the future. Before I begin, I'd like to place on record my sincere thanks to the parliamentary staff who have provided such excellent support and guidance to me, and I'm sure to many others, over the last 2 weeks. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure you can recall what it was like when you first arrived here, and having the support of those staff has made the transition into Westminster so much easier. Because as a newly elected MP, I have to say, this is unlike any other workplace I have ever attended. That's why I wholeheartedly support my right honourable friend, the Leader of the House's proposal for a modernisation committee that will look again at the culture and working practices within the House. I certainly hope to support its work in whatever way I can. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would also like to express my thanks to my predecessor, Sir Robert Sims. He and I both share a pride in representing the constituency of Poole, and he served both this House and his local residents for 27 years. Even in defeat, he was generous enough to offer me his assistance in acclimatising to parliamentary life, and for that I am very grateful. Yeah. I also owe him an apology, because after an exhausting 3 recounts, which lasted until 11 o'clock the following morning on the 5th of July, I forgot to properly thank him for his service. And I hope I can rectify that today and wish him well for the future. Yeah. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am aware, having listened to a number of maiden speeches in the last few days, that new members wax lyrical about how beautiful their constituency might be. And I'm not going to deviate from that format. Anyone who has ever visited as a tourist will know that the beaches at Branksome Chine and Sandbanks are world class. And Poole Park is a superb example of Victorian municipal pride, winning awards for its well-managed green spaces, something which in today's busy world I think is much needed. The park borders Poole's magnificent harbour. From the Iron Age onwards, the harbour area has been inhabited, becoming a major trading centre with Newfoundland in the 16th century, and by the 19th century, 9 out of 10 workers were involved in some kind of harbour activity. We even had the odd pirate, Madam Deputy Speaker, as well. This link to the sea played its part in World War II, when Poole was the 3rd largest embarkation point for the D-Day landings of Operation Overlord. And the local marine base played a key role in the Falklands conflict. Today, the marine industry continues to play a significant role in the town, whether through the manufacturing of yachts, the fishing industry, or associated tourism. Of course, the most famous nautical connection is the headquarters of the RNLI, which is celebrating its 200th anniversary. I was happy to add my name to the honourable friends' early day motion, the member for Hastings and Rye, on the RNLI's anniversary, and pay tribute to the men and women who have volunteered over the years to save others, irrespective of who they are or where they come from. Yeah. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, you will know that a rising tide raises all the boats. That's why it's important for members to understand that not everyone in Poole is a multi-millionaire. Whilst the most expensive land in the country, known as Sandbanks, might be home to footballers and celebrities, nearly 7,000 residents in Poole are struggling to cover essential costs within their monthly income, according to Citizens' Advice. And 1 in 3 of those are in work. Like the rest of the country, this has got worse over the years of austerity and then the cost of living crisis. That's why I want to pay tribute today to people like Mel Meadowcroft and her team of volunteers who I had the pleasure of meeting, who run the community food store in St Gabriel's Church in Hamworthy. This offers local families a chance to buy the things they need at very low cost, but importantly, in a way that retains their dignity. Without this work, many more families would be in severe financial difficulty. That is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the King's speech and the commitment to make work pay, as set out in the Employment Rights Bill. As a former full-time trade union official, used to negotiating with employers and representing members, I am well aware of the need to reset the balance in the workplace, to enable working people to organise as a way of improving their terms and conditions, as well as making the improvements needed to address low pay and inequality in the workplace. Banning zero-hour contracts, ending fire and rehire, and giving day one rights on parental leave, sick pay and protection from unfair dismissal will be significant achievements of this government and will bring about lasting change that I think will benefit millions of working people, including those in my constituency. Yeah. I would like to close by thanking some significant people in putting me here today. The residents of Poole for having the confidence to vote for a Labour MP for the first time in the history of the seat. Yeah. To my wonderful Poole Labour family for their commitment to the cause and a tremendous sense of camaraderie. And to my wife Helen for believing it was possible. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a great sense of pride in being here today, and I will do whatever I can over the lifetime of this Parliament to repay the faith that the people of Poole, my party and my family have shown in me. Thank you.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Again, a pleasure to serve under your chairship for the second day running. Can I first of all say what a pleasure is to follow the Honourable Gentleman for Poole. Wish him and all the others who have made their maiden speeches today. I think this House is enriched and blessed by the contributions of everyone from all sides of the chamber, and I think it augurs good for the future in this chamber. Everyone brings their knowledge and their expertise of the subject matters to this House, and we can all benefit. I want, in the very short time I'm able to make a contribution, to refer to an important conversation with the surrounding MPs, double jobbing. Madam Deputy Speaker, our three main roles as MPs are accountability, scrutiny and representation. It should be our main priorities as elected representatives. There are ways to be critical and compassionate in relation to this subject. However, I want to consider those that may have had businesses, etc., before they came into this House as an MP. A report in 2015 indicated that 26 MPs declared more earnings from directorships, paid employment, shareholdings than they did from parliamentary salary. And that puts a question in my mind. On the other hand, it has never been any secret from any one of my colleagues in this place how grateful I am to be able to carry on my role. I dedicate so much of my time, as others do as well, to doing my job to the best of my ability. We have, I make this point, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have 7 Sinn Féin MPs who actually are elected, but they don't come here. Is that a role for the MP and relation? But they don't get a wage, but what they do is they are able to claim office cost expenses. There are undoubtedly issues regarding double jobbing which need to be addressed, but these issues are down to individual circumstances. For instance, an MP, and I don't know everybody's circumstances, could come to this House, could be here for 5 years for one term, and they will still have a mortgage to pay. So what about the job that they may have had before they come here, and the opportunity that may have been? I just put that forward as a suggestion. Ever mindful, whenever I came here, I was also a councillor, a member of the Legislative Assembly, and then became the MP. I give my councillorship up. I give it to someone else. My life is the same. I give my business, which I own, to my son. So those are examples of what we can do. So it's easy to see both sides of the argument, and consideration be given to both sides of it. However, my stance is clear. My number one priority is doing the job I was elected to by representing the people of Strangford who elected me, scrutinise government legislation and being held accountable to my constituents. So that's what I'm about. In relation to the other issue which I want to speak to, modernisation, I can well remember, Madam Deputy Speaker, coming to this House and being on these green benches like other members have been, and how overwhelming it was to feel the weight of that responsibility on your shoulders. So I'm innately aware of what it means to have the honour to represent my constituency in the greatest seat of democracy. As much as I have found the difference in how things were handled beginning when I was first elected in 2010 and coming to terms with the traditional aspect of the House, I now treasure these traditions, and I put it forward the other point of view that some have expressed, where they want lots of change, and those who see the traditions as something that I wish to hold on to. I agree with the rationale, and this is something that I'm afraid we will lose if we blindly modernise. The fact that there is rationale behind these timeless traditions. Mr. Speaker said to honourable members, that if you want to catch my eye, wear a tie. Well, everybody who can wear a tie and should wear a tie is wearing one today, and that's a rationale that I support. I think it's the right way to do things. If we don't move, if we do not move with the times, then the times will move without us. However, I would urge caution in ensuring that not one thing is changed simply because we can and not because we should. Not all modernisations are welcomed. Just put forward this point of view. The rules now in place, which preclude me from being an officer in more than 6 APPGs, all party parliamentary groups, have been difficult as I'm letting some of those groups down. I just put that forward as a point of view. Obviously, others will have a different point of view in relation to it. Some modernisations are necessary. The overhaul of financial claims was a vital tool in restoring public confidence. Modernisation of the voting system was necessary for function during COVID, and I'm thankful that the flexibility was there, but we need to be incredibly careful if we consider changes to commons voting, which does not result in more absenteeism and remote voting. Someone suggested that. I suggest we don't change it. Modernisation of the maternity system was a long overdue, and I'm thankful for that. And this is a highlight of how we need modernisation. But again, I highlight that it must be for a clear purpose and not for ease of operation. The tradition of this place should not be dismissed as merely tradition. There is wisdom behind much of this, and this indeed must be protected. And I would urge this House to make sure that the protection is in place. I am all, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am all for modernisation as necessary. But I feel very strongly that this must be done with wisdom and sensitivity, and that our centuries-long traditions should not be abandoned to give an appearance of modern society. Yes, I would love to speak in every first in every debate, but I'm not going to. I won't be allowed. It wouldn't be the right way to do it. I respect the convention that prevents this as being ancient but necessary, and every single issue discussed must be considered in this way. Madam Deputy Speaker, just because something has aged does not mean that it ceases to be of use, and that must be the premise of any discussion on modernisation in this great house that we live in, this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Better together, all this culture, history, traditions, and all parts of society. We have it here. We can do it together, and we can work together to make the changes in the right way, not just for change's sake, but the changes that are necessary. Thank you.
I call Gordon McKee to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I start by congratulating you on your election and welcoming you to the chair, although it feels a bit weird to welcome anyone here, given I've been here for about 2 minutes. I follow on from a number of excellent contributions from the new Honourable Member for Powell, for Cardiff West, and for Edinburgh East and Musselburgh, among others. And I'd like to praise in particular the Honourable Member for Edinburgh East and Musselburgh, both because he gave an excellent speech, but also because his mum is one of my constituents. Now, as I start this new job, I've been thinking a lot about my family, and as I was preparing my remarks today, I was thinking the same. I was thinking in particular of my grandpa, who was a coal miner in the coalfields of Lanarkshire, just outside of Glasgow. And as a wee boy, he'd tell me of the conditions that he worked in. Darkness, he said, so black that you could hold your hand right in front of your eyes and still not be able to see it. And in that darkness, he'd toil away, unable to imagine his own future, let alone the future of his grandwains, as he would say. And all the while he toiled, he was inhaling fumes so toxic that later in life he'd have lung cancer and live the rest of his life with just one lung. And my dad today is a welder, off during the Glasgow Fair, along with my mum, who runs her own business, to watch me here from the gallery. And my career so far has been very different to that of my parents and my grandparents. For a start, they've got a proper job, whereas I'm now doing this for a living. But it's different for two related reasons. And the first is the Labour Party, both literally in the sense that it's helped provide me with a new job, but also in the protections that it has delivered for working people. Health and safety legislation, delivered by Labour and built by the trade union movement, have ended the kind of conditions that my grandparents worked in. And the second reason it's different is technology. I suspect today in Britain there are more Bitcoin miners than there are coal miners, and that's ultimately a good thing. It was difficult and hard and laborious work. Now, as a kid, I spent many long hours in front of my computer, and while much of that was spent playing FIFA against my wee brother Mark, some of it was more productive, because I taught myself to code. I watched YouTube videos, and over weeks, over months and over years, learned how to build software. I developed iPhone apps that were used around the world. It meant that code written on my laptop in Glasgow would be pushed out to devices around the world in seconds. And it meant that this 19-year-old kid in his childhood bedroom could run an app servicing people from Los Angeles to Dubai. And if it can do that, technology can reform our public services too. Technology might even help reform this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, as we're debating today. And I hope and know that high-growth, innovative businesses in my home city of Glasgow will be a key part of that. Now, much has been said and written about Glasgow over the years, but one thing sticks with me in particular. Anthony Bourdain was not a man known for his parliamentary language, but let's just say that he described Glasgow as the most unpretentious place on earth. An antidote to the world. In his words, so unapologetically working class and attitude-free. And I think he was right, because of all the things I love about Glasgow, it's our people and our humour that I enjoy most. If you ever get a wee bit too big for your boots, returning home to Glasgow will soon put an end to that. Something that I'm sure will be increasingly useful the longer I spend in this place. But unlike many Glaswegians, my admiration even extends to some of Glasgow's politicians. It's customary in speeches like this to praise your predecessor, but I know that for some it will be done through slightly gritted teeth at the end of a long and bitter-fought election campaign. In my case, I talk about my predecessor with genuine warmth and admiration. Stuart MacDonald served the people of Glasgow South diligently, and he built an enviable reputation in this place. He was particularly respected for his long-standing support for the people of Ukraine, something which saw him awarded the Ukrainian Order of Merit. And if I leave this place, having done half as much as he did for people around the world fighting for democracy, then I will leave here a happy man. Before Stuart, there were Labour predecessors, Tom Harris, who has been personally kind to me, and now Lord Maxon of the other place, previously John Maxon, whose son taught me modern studies in high school, believe it or not, although I'll leave it up to others to judge whether he did a good or a bad job of doing that. And of course, Teddy Taylor, who's still remembered fondly by many of my constituents. I'd also like to mention two other former members of this House who had a big impact on my life, both from Glasgow. The former member for East Kilbride, Adam Ingram, grew up in the East End of Glasgow, and he was one of the first people that I ever spoke to in the Labour Party. His advice and wise counsel has been a constant source of support to me over the years, and I'm incredibly grateful. And a Southsider, my friend, and the former member for Glasgow Central, Anas Sarwar. I had the great privilege of serving as the director of Anas's successful leadership campaign to become leader of Scottish Labour. And as we sat 3.5 years ago, beginning that campaign, it was hard to imagine what the future might hold. But even in our most optimistic of moments, I don't think we'd have predicted this. I stand here as one of 37 Scottish Labour MPs. Now, having praised 3 Glaswegians, I'm going to do something unusual for a Glasgow MP, and that's praise someone from Edinburgh. The Right Honourable Member for Edinburgh South has been a friend of mine for many years, and he deserves enormous credit for his long and lonely shift as the sole Scottish Labour MP, and for being someone who recognised that the Labour Party had to change if it was to earn people's trust once again. It gives me enormous pleasure and pride to see him in his rightful place as the Secretary of State for Scotland. Now, with that brief interlude aside, we return to Scotland's real capital city. I'm privileged to represent Glasgow's south side, a place that's had something of a renaissance in recent years. The trendy tenements of Shawlands, tree-lined avenues of Newlands, and the beautiful conservation village of Kilmarnock, among others. My constituency contains many of Glasgow's beautiful parks. Lynn Park, Queen's Park and Pollock Country Park are just a few. And in the latter, you'll find the Borough Collection, which was awarded the Art Fund Museum of the Year award after reopening last year. But, like many parts of the city, we're not without difficulties. Castlemilk is an area with enormous spirit and the kindest people you'll ever meet, but it also remains an area with challenges. Even today, the simple act of getting a supermarket in Castlemilk has proven difficult, something that I hope to help change as a local MP. But what is true of all of my constituency, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that it is an outward-looking, diverse and welcoming place. In particular, I'd like to mention the Scots Asian community, who who have contributed enormously to Glasgow's character, and I'm very proud to represent them here in Parliament. Immigration has made my constituency richer, and it makes our country richer too.
Hear, hear.
The south side of Glasgow is also a passionately pro-European place, and while of course Brexit was settled in the previous Parliament, I intend to support the Government's moves to repair our relationship with Europe. My first duty is to my constituency and to my country, and being the Member of Parliament for Glasgow South is the only job that I will do so long as the people of Glasgow South wish for me to continue. But I also feel a sense of responsibility to the many millions of people at home and around the world who do not have a voice. The people toiling away in darkness, just as my grandpa did all those years ago. So I hope that all of us in this House don't forget the millions, indeed billions of people around the world who aren't as lucky as us. Those facing persecution or war, those without access to clean water or a good education, and those bound by modern slavery. I am one of the lucky few to serve in this place, but I will never forget the people who put me here and the people who don't have a voice. Delivering for them will be how I judge my success. Thank you.
I call Lisa Smart to make her maiden speech.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to give my maiden speech, and it is an absolute honour to follow the new member for Glasgow South. He spoke passionately about his constituency, and his love for his constituents is absolutely clear for all to hear. It's also an honour to follow maiden speeches from members from Ipswich, Spelthorne, Telford, Edinburgh East and Musselburgh, Mid-Bedfordshire, Cardiff West, Wolverhampton North East and Poole. Each in their own way, Madam Deputy Speaker, they are an act to follow. I want to start by expressing my thanks to the people of Hazel Grove constituency for placing their trust in me. That trust is a profound responsibility, and I am committed to repaying it through hard work, integrity and service to my community. I'd like to acknowledge the work of my predecessor, William Wragg, who served in Parliament from 2015 until standing down at the last election. He stood up to those in power when he felt it was needed and spoke openly about poor mental health in a way I'm sure will have really helped break down stigma. On behalf of all residents of Hazel Grove, I wish him all the best for the future. I accept, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I may be a little biased, but Hazel Grove is quite clearly the finest constituency in the land. It ranges from central Stockport out to the edge of the Peak District, taking in the communities of Bredbury, Bosden Farm, Compstall, Greatmoor, Hawk Green, Heverley, High Lane, Littlemore, Marplebridge, Mellor, Millbrown, Norbury, Offerton, Romley, Strines, Woodley and some, but not all, of Hazel Grove itself. Whether it's the peaceful havens of our green spaces or the proud reminders of our industrial heritage, Hazel Grove has it all. We have the Peak Forest and Macclesfield canals, with one of the steepest lock flights in the country, and our beautiful rivers, the Goyt, the Mersey and the Tame. It's no wonder so many people want to call our area home. Our rivers would be even more beautiful, of course, if the water company wasn't pumping quite so much sewage into them, and we very much look forward to the government plans to clean up this scandal. But it's the people who really make our community. From Starting Point Social Enterprise in Woodley, giving some of my more mature constituents confidence to get online and tackle digital exclusion, to the Cherry Tree Project in Romilly, empowering young people to live their best lives, or MK Theatre Arts, working with children and adults of all abilities across the borough to use creativity and the performing arts to transform lives. Local people have many of the answers we seek on how to fix the problems we as a country face. I see my job here and the job of this House to empower them, not to tell them what's good for them. I'm a Liberal and I'm a Liberal Democrat, and we exist to build and safeguard a fair, free and open society in which we seek to balance the fundamental values of liberty, equality and community, and in which no one shall be enslaved by poverty, ignorance or conformity. I joined the Lib Dems and got involved in politics because shouting at the television wasn't bringing about the changes that we need. My constituents have been very clear with me that their top priority is our local health service. Now, my constituents shouldn't have a hospital that is literally falling down. They shouldn't have to wait months and years for treatment, and they shouldn't have to struggle to care for their loved ones. The phenomenal staff at Stepping Hill Hospital shouldn't have to wade through flooded corridors to get to their patients because yet another pipe has burst as it did this last weekend. Stepping Hill Hospital must get the repairs it needs, and we need a new additional hospital in the town centre so that local people can get the health and social care services they deserve. I will not rest until they do. Now, I couldn't possibly make my first speech in this House without mentioning the last Liberal Democrat to represent my community, Andrew Stunnell. Andrew was the MP for Hazel Grove from 1997 to 2015, and he was that rare kind of politician who gave politics a good name. He was an MP who set the standard to which all who came after him are rightly held. He was interested in doing something, not just being something. He put his constituents first, and he brought about changes in the law, both as a minister and as a backbencher, and he made things better for the whole country. As a minister, he delivered the Localism Act, but as a backbencher, he came top of the private members' bill ballot in 2003, and this resulted in the Sustainable and Secure Buildings Bill becoming an Act of Parliament in 2004. But more than all that, he was one of the warmest, kindest people I have ever met. He was the kind of person you want on your team, hardworking, honest and kind. He helped me work out what it was to make a difference in public life. The people of Hazel Grove, the whole Lib Dem family, and I will miss him and his guidance hugely. I'm the first woman to be elected as the MP for Hazel Grove, and I take that responsibility really seriously. I am especially delighted to be a member of the largest group of Liberal Democrats ever elected to this House. There are 73 of us, if you include the Right Honourable Jenny. I went to a comprehensive school, and I was the first member of my family to go to university. And before deciding that shouting at the telly wasn't bringing about the changes that I wanted to see in the world, and that standing for elective office was the way to be part of that change, I worked in a business as a director of client relations, where my clients were big pension funds. They were charities and they were foundations. And then I was a chief exec of a charity educating women and girls in the developing world. I've also been lucky enough to represent some of my constituents for the last 8 years as an elected councillor for Bredbury Green and Romiley on Stockport Council, a role I have loved. And I'm one of a rather large number of colleagues who come to this House knowing firsthand the value of local government and the desperate need for it to be funded properly. Yeah. So to the substance of our debate today, Madam Deputy Speaker, on standards and on modernisation. And I think the main thrust of what we've heard from the government and from the Leader of the House, that any further roles should benefit an MP's constituents, is absolutely right. In the short term, we should, of course, stop MPs taking on roles as paid parliamentary advisers, strategists or consultants. And in the longer term, daylight is often the best disinfectant. And I'd ask the Leader of the House to consider whether publishing any employment contracts for outside arrangements with suitable redactions and the transparency that would bring would allow constituents to judge for themselves whether they think they're getting value for money from their MP. And as a new MP, I am struck and more than a little bemused by some of the wonderful conventions and habits of this House. I think taking it as read that colleagues are honourable is a good thing. And I think referring to one another as the member for our constituency acts as a really powerful reminder of who sent us here. But I'm also struck by how much modernisation is needed. And we on the Lib Dem benches look forward to supporting the government where we agree. I would, though, expect us to urge, persuade and, on occasion, push the government to go further and faster to make us the most effective we can be, because our constituents deserve no less. With so many newly elected colleagues, we have a cracking opportunity to change this place for the better. It could be so much more efficient and so much more effective. And let's do that with fresh eyes before we're all too institutionalised and think that some of this stuff is normal. But that's also going to take some courage from the new government, because making processes and procedures less obscure so that more people understand them and making this place more efficient will mean MPs have more power and the government slightly less of it. And governments, and I'm guessing especially governments with new large majorities, will probably go rather fond of that power quite quickly. So let's get cracking. Alongside modernising this place, we should of course reform our politics and our democracy more fundamentally. The House of Lords should obviously be elected, 16 and 17-year-olds should be able to vote, and we must replace the antiquated and deeply unfair first-past-the-post system with a fair, proportionate voting system. I look forward to making the case for these changes during my time here. Madam Deputy Speaker, this election was the 4th time I have stood to represent the people of Hazel Grove as the Lib Dem candidate, and it probably takes a certain sort of stubbornness, resilience and determination to do that. It most certainly takes the support of your family, and especially of my partner Ed. I am so grateful to them. Our mischievous rescue dog Bonnie hasn't quite made up her mind yet what she thinks about me working away from home rather more, but I hope to be able to convince her that winning is better than losing, as it undoubtedly is, because winning enables you to get stuff done, and there is a lot to do. It is the honour of my life to be elected to represent my phenomenal community, the people of Hazel Grove constituency. They will be at the heart of everything I do here, and I hope I do them proud.
Yeah. I call Hamish Faulkner to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Deputy Madam Speaker. I'd like to pay tribute to the many maiden speeches of new members I've heard today, including the Honourable Member for Hazel Grove for her fine speech. Honourable friends have spoken with affection and commitment about their home constituencies. Each of them rightly places their own area above all others. That is understandable. But I stand before you, Deputy Madam Speaker, as the member for the oldest continuous constituency to send a member to this House. For almost 1,000 years, men and women have stood, as I stand today, proud to proclaim themselves the member for Lincoln. I walk in the footsteps of a series of strong Labour women. Lincoln's first female Member of Parliament was a titan of our movement, Margaret Beckett. Grafton House, Lincoln's Labour Club, was founded and sustained by the much-missed Leo. Margaret was succeeded by 2 other formidable Labour women, Gillian Merron and Karen Lee, both of whom continue to serve our movement in local and national government. I'm honoured to succeed them. I would like to pay tribute too to my immediate predecessor, Carl McCartney, who also loved the city. He dedicated himself particularly to improving local transport provision. He pressed forward with relief roads for the city, and I now take up that cause too. Lincoln is a beautiful, historic, young and dynamic city, but we're far from other major urban centres, and indeed from any of my honourable friends on these benches. We need a public transport network that reflects that relative geographic isolation, and I hope to work with colleagues across this House to make sure that Lincoln and Lincolnshire gets the transport network that it needs. Honourable and right honourable members may not yet be sick of hearing me talk about the urgent necessity to upgrade the Lincoln to Newark line, one of the slowest in the country, but I assure them that they will be. All of us elected to serve our communities will, of course, be seeking the support that they deserve, as I also intend to in relation to the cost of living, healthcare and housing. But I also want to pause to pay tribute to the service that my city has done for this country. That service snakes back even further than my predecessors. Over 1,000 years ago, in 1217, England seemed almost lost. French forces, loyal to Prince Louis, had taken most of England and even the majority of Lincoln herself. It was only our castle, led by a woman in her mid-60s, Nicola de la Haye, the Constable of Lincoln Castle, who survived months of bitter siege warfare before finally repelling the invaders at the Battle of Lincoln, securing the city and saving England. Hundreds of years later, Lincoln and her workers again sprang to the defence of this country. In the chaos of the First World War, facing mechanised industrial-scale warfare of the most horrifying kind, Lincoln invented the tank. We produced 1 in 14 of all RAF planes at Rustons, and the working people of Lincoln delivered to this country the equipment and people needed to prevail against the odds. On these benches and in this movement, we never forget that. Yeah. Lincoln's connection with the RAF has never since dimmed. Less than a decade later, young men, including my grandfather, trained to fly at the RAF stations surrounding our city. To this day, we're proud to continue to host RAF Waddington, one of the most important of the RAF spaces. At this moment, Waddington and its brave men and women protect this country and this house, as does Sir Graham Barracks in Uphill Lincoln. I am proud of their service. I'll be a champion for them and their families for as long as I am in this place. Like so many of my constituents, public service also took me far from home. I was surprised and honoured to be asked to return to the Foreign Office shortly after my election to this place. I know that my constituents expect me to do my duty there as they do at Waddington and across the world. It is an honour to join the government, but before I ever speak from the front benches on government business, I want, Madam Deputy Speaker, with your permission, to send a message to my constituents. I am first and foremost the member for Lincoln, for the city and Bracebridge, Waddington and Skellingthorpe, for the schools and 2 universities, for the barracks and the airbase, the hospital, cathedral and castle, our copy of the Magna Carta, the independent shops of the Bail, Sinsel Bank, the parks of Bootham and Hartsholme, the Gillies, the Ermine, for Birchwood and Steep Hill. This is the honour of my life, and our city on a hill will be my first and last priority for as long as you send me here. Thank you.
And I call Patrick Spencer for his maiden speech.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is an honour to rise to make my first formal contribution as a member of this House. And can I start by congratulating you on your election and taking your seat there. I'll also start by making a slight admission of honesty. I would admit that since arriving here, I've been nervous and anxious to make my maiden speech. You might even say I delayed making my maiden speech for fear that my new colleagues were superb orators who went on to make excellent speeches. Well, I'm happy to admit that that fear came to pass, that they have been some superb speeches in the last couple of days. And even today, and I'd like to pay tribute to my honourable friend from Spelthorne, my honourable friend from Mid-Bedfordshire, the honourable member for Edinburgh East and Musselburgh, Cardiff West, Poole, Glasgow South, Hazel Grove and Lincoln, and of course my neighbour, the honourable member for Ipswich. A great speech that did justice to that town, and I thank him for his kind words. He's no longer here, so I will stop the niceties there. I am in the fortunate position to have been sent to this place to represent a constituency and a people that have played a huge role in my life. My grandfather grew up in East London before moving to Essex to raise a family. It was in the 1980s, after retirement and with my grandmother Mary, that he made that all too familiar trip up the A12 to settle just 20 minutes outside of Ipswich. My earliest and happiest childhood memories were spent falling in love with a country and a countryside that I still call home today, a county and a people I am now humbled to represent in this place. Shock horror, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think central Suffolk and North Ipswich is blessed with some of the most beautiful countryside in England. But it is in fact the history of the area that makes it unique. The Anglo-Saxon king Raedwald was one of the richest
and most powerful of his era. Consequently, Suffolk has become a treasure trove for archaeologists for nearly a century. My neighbour in Suffolk Coastal can indeed boast of Sutton Hoo, but on my far eastern border, just last year, a 1400-year-old pre-Christian temple was discovered, and experts can trace human activity in the area for almost 6,000 years. I'm also fortunate to count the beautiful market town of Framlingham in my patch, home to Framlingham Castle, a former seat of the famous Howard family, and St Michael's Church, which contains the tombs of Tudor royalty and nobility, something I love to take my 2 children to go and see. And of course, I have Helmingham Hall in my constituency, which has unbelievably hosted both Queens Elizabeth I and Elizabeth II. It is unsurprising, given our ancient, lush and beautiful landscape, that we have a rich history of producing great artists who are inspired by those surroundings. Thomas Gainsborough, John Constable, Benjamin Britten, even Brian Eno and Ed Sheeran, to name a few, are all products of our wonderful county in some way or another. I'm afraid to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, this child of Suffolk was not blessed with the same artistic talent. The other great contribution, though, I've always felt that Suffolk makes to our country is that of food and drink. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been told by my wife that this is a domain that I certainly have more expertise and experience on. Central Suffolk is, and North Ipswich is home to Aspel cider, manufactured for almost 300 years from apple trees in the grounds of Aspel Hall. It is now one of the most recognisable brands in the global drinks market, exporting products to customers around the world. A great example of homegrown British global business success. As well as cider, we're also great exporters of sausages, spuds, chocolate and condiments. It's not uncommon to find Suffolk produce in shops across the country. And it is for that reason, in the past, and will now in this place support initiatives like that of my honourable friend, the member for Hinckley and Bosworth, to give consumers in this country the opportunity to buy produce from producers in this country. And while Suffolk farming and while the Suffolk farming and agricultural community is such an important part of our local community, I feel it's also emblematic of our local culture and identity. With its no-nonsense attitude to hard work, a love for family and community, complete and utter ambivalence to the weather, a deep affection for our natural environment. I'm sure all members have their bias, but I'm of the firm belief that the people of Central Suffolk and North Ipswich are the finest our country has to offer. While I hope to be a voice primarily for the people of Suffolk and Ipswich, I also hope to use my time in this place to speak up for another cause. In a previous life, before entering this place, I worked under the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green at the Centre for Social Justice, and then as an advisor in the Department for Education. In that time, I realised that the Conservative Party and conservatism has a proud story to tell on the critical issue of helping those who need help, offering the most vulnerable in our society not just a handout, but a leg up, and standing up for what is just and fair in society. More than anything, it is about giving people the opportunity to meet their own potential. Now, I count the wards of Witton, White House and Castle Hill as part of my patch. Witton and White House are two of the most deprived wards in our country. Castle Hill is probably one of the most unequal. Ipswich, by any measure, like its football team, is a huge success story. But large parts of it, including many of those families living in White House, Witton and Castle Hill, have been left behind. The story is an all too familiar one. The failure to adapt in a post-industrial economy. Generations of low-wage work, if not worklessness, the proliferation of crime and high levels of immigration that have caused a degree of social polarisation. For however long the people of Central Suffolk and North Ipswich want me to represent them, I will fight in this place to empower those people who feel left behind, to those who want to get on in life, to those who want and can reach their potential. And at a time when faith and trust in politics is at an all-time low among those who feel locked out of our economy and our society, there is no pressing a cause than that of ensuring Britain works for everyone. Today we are debating the merits of allowing MPs to have a second job. Time and again on the doorstep, Madam Deputy Speaker, during this election, but also across the dining tables now for many years, I have heard from people, rich and poor, young and old, left and right, that they have lost faith in politicians to do the right thing. Believe it or not, Madam Deputy Speaker, the NHS, immigration, jobs, incomes, access to homes, all of them were hugely important to the voters at this general election. But the most important thing to the people across my constituency, from White House to Witton, Kesgrave to Claydon, Ringsall to Rendon, was, whether they voted for me or not, by the way, was restoring a sense of moral probity and public spiritedness to our political system. So as we embark on this debate and others in this place, let us keep that in mind. Of course, before I finish, I would like to pay tribute to my predecessor, Dr. Dan Poulter. He was, if anything, a dedicated servant to the people of Suffolk and Ipswich as both an MP and in his second job as a consultant doctor. He used his invaluable NHS experience as a junior minister in the Department for Health to sit on the draft bill committee reviewing the Mental Health Act for the first time in 40 years. And we felt the benefits of his healthcare expertise in Suffolk when he managed to save Hertfordshire Hospital, previously of my constituency, now in the neighbouring Waveney Valley, and when he lobbied the government for a new accident and emergency wing for Ipswich General Hospital. As many people know, Dr. Dan arrived in this House as a member of my party and left as a member of another. But I don't feel any ill will, for it was another political hero of mine, Winston Churchill, who performed a similar journey over 120 years ago. And I don't mind saying it here, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I too hope one day to cross the floor, alas, before I give my whips a heart attack. Not to swap political allegiances, but to be as a part of the Conservative Party elected back into government and taking our place back on the government benches. That came from a government whip, by the way. That was a government whip issue line. In the meantime, though, I'd like to thank my wife and my two little boys, Leo and Jasper, who I am sure are watching this on BBC Parliament right now. I would like to thank the doorkeepers and the clerks. I want to thank my mother. You've been a real trooper. She has been a real trooper to sit through nearly a 3.5-hour debate. She looks brighter now than she did when I put her on a polling station as a teller. But anyway, in the meantime, as I was saying, I look forward to working with members across this House in the pursuit of delivering for the people of this great nation.
I intend to start wind-ups, front bench wind-ups at 4:40, but I call Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the very short amount of time available to me, let me hope that this place can rise to the occasion set by so many glorious maiden speeches in what we do in this Modernisation Committee, because the truth is you do not have any rights as an MP, and yet you've come here to defend the rights of your constituents. That will matter when it comes to being a modern workplace, one which is safe, not just for yourself, but for your staff, accessible, not just for yourself, but anybody who comes to see you, and indeed one which does not lead to divorce and drink and all the other things that you may have been warned about as a Member of Parliament. Let me in 1 minute tell you what I think we possibly could do through this committee to redress that and give you some rights. If you employ young women in this place, somebody will take them out for a drink to warn them about this place and people that they should be aware of. As an employer yourself, that is not good enough. We must enforce the Paul Kernow review. We must ensure that where people are facing bullying, sexual harassment, there is no fairness, there is no favour and no political interference, because sadly no political party can hold their head up on this. We must learn from other jurisdictions around the world, whether it is New Zealand, whether it is Australia, whether it is Ireland, in making this place family friendly. That is not just about a workplace creche, it's about holiday clubs, it's about actually knowing what time you're going to leave here so that you can get home. I tell you now that nobody in this place will enjoy doing bedtime via FaceTime, but unless we reform this place to make it family friendly, that is the future ahead for all of you and your families. Let me also put my mind to the gender-sensitive Parliament review that the Kigali Accord that we signed up to as a Parliament and say we must make this happen, not just for the women in this place, but all the women and men to come. There are so many things that we can do through this Modernisation Committee. It's a very welcome development, but the test will be whether we do those things. And I urge all of you, new and old, to make sure that happens.
I call Lib Dem spokesperson Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd first like to thank and say how impressed by all of the maiden speeches that we've heard this afternoon I was. In particular, the Honourable Member for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich, who talked about the importance of restoring moral probity, a very relevant subject for today's debate, and it's good to hear that he heard that on many doorsteps. So did I during the election campaign. I also thought it was good that he referred to his predecessor, the former MP Dan Poulter, who I think was an example to many people in this place, who used his experience in another job, I won't say a second job, another job, to inform debate and make sure that the things that were said in this House were based on professional experience and knowledge that could only be found through that personal experience of a professional like him. As members of Parliament, we're fortunate to have one of the most satisfying jobs in the world. There should be no such thing as a safe seat that can be assumed as if it was some sort of sinecure. The job of MP ought to be earned through hard work and dedication, and the public put their trust in each of us to be their champion and their voice. The Liberal Democrats welcome this debate on the Code of Conduct, and in particular the fact that it will examine second jobs. Because for all members, our primary focus has to be on serving those people who elected us and put us here. In recent years, we've seen a series of scandals that have weakened people's trust in politics and politicians, and I very much welcome the fact that the Modernisation Committee will seek to restore some of that trust. Aside from the scandals of the sort referred to by my honourable friend, the member for North East Fife, there are also a tiny number of MPs who are really quite absent. And I want to illustrate the problem with one of the more egregious examples, the case of the Right Honourable Member for Torridge and Tavistock, who is not in his place, but who I have notified that I plan to refer to today. The Right Honourable Member is a former Attorney General and is a very eminent barrister and has a high-profile career outside of this place. It was revealed that in 2021 he'd earned more than £1 million in a single year, including by representing tax havens in the Caribbean, but that he was absent from parliamentary votes because of this outside work, and in one case he even voted by proxy from 4,000 miles away. Between 2023 and 24, the Right Honourable Member declared more than £836,000 of external earnings for 500 hours work, the equivalent of 66 full days' work, while having contributed to just 4 debates in the whole of 2023. In the whole of the last Parliament, the Right Honourable Member contributed to just 22 debates here in the Commons. Look at Hansard. That included a contribution to just 1 debate in 2020 and 1 debate in 2021, with no record in Hansard of him having contributed to a debate in 18 months. This is in stark contrast to what we heard about Dr. Dan Poulter. It is not a party political point. Dan Poulter contributed to 124 debates in the last Parliament and made some really significant contributions with his experience as a mental health doctor. Likewise, the Honourable Member for Tooting is not party political. She is a Labour MP and a doctor who has put in shifts in accident and emergency and does this not just to upkeep the medical professional qualification, but because this is actually a service that informs and enlightens the legislation that we debate in this House. No, I am taking issue with that very, very small number of MPs who give the rest of us a bad name by earning huge sums of money for the hours of work that they put in outside of this place in what is frankly their first job, not their second one. They and we must remember that our principal employer is the voting public in those areas that we represent. Being elected as an MP is a massive privilege. It's a role that we should strive to do our very utmost to fulfil. We must work night and day to repay the trust that is put in us by voters. The Modernisation Committee should ensure that we are focused first and foremost on our jobs here. Thank you.
I call Shadow Leader of the House, Chris Philp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And let me congratulate you on your election. I congratulated one of your colleagues at the beginning. Let me add those congratulations to you on your election to the chair. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me start by saying huge congratulations and well done to the members on both sides making some very impressive maiden speeches today. The member for Ipswich, who I'm struggling to see, listed off all the Premier League grounds he intends to visit now his team are in the Premier League, but he did not mention Selhurst Park, the home of Crystal Palace in the borough that I represent in Parliament. I'm sure an accidental omission. The member for Spelthorne made an excellent maiden speech. Good luck with the house move that is coming up, and he very wisely observed he does not plan to place any political bets anytime soon. The member for Telford gave an excellent speech. He clearly brings to the House experience as a former chair of the Local Government Association. There is certainly no need for him to experience any imposter syndrome. We also heard from the member for Edinburgh East, who spoke extremely eloquently about his constituency and the Edinburgh Festival. We heard from the new member for Mid-Bedfordshire, on his support for the modernisation of Parliament and his commitment to public service here. We heard from the member from Cardiff West, who made an excellent and very eloquent speech, the new member for Wolverhampton North East, who will clearly bring her experience as a former deputy head teacher to bear here. The member for Poole, who I think possibly has one of the narrowest majorities in Parliament, which he will no doubt be valiantly defending. The member for Glasgow South and Hazel Grove, who paid very fulsome tribute to the work done by her predecessor, Andrew Stunnell. The new member for Lincoln, who has already assumed ministerial office. But I can see his red ministerial folder on his knees there, a meteoric ascent. And of course the member for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich, who apparently is going to be the new Ed Sheeran of Parliament. I took that from his speech anyway, and whose mum is with us today. I did speak to a Labour member whose mum was also here during her maiden speech a few days ago. Apparently her mum fell asleep during the preceding speeches, which, well, you can take that how you will. Anyway, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me just quickly, having congratulated the new members for those really brilliant maiden speeches, let me just turn back to the substance before us. I think my friend, the Honourable Member for South Leicestershire, spoke with great eloquence earlier about the importance of making sure we do take on board the long expertise of the existing House committees, particularly the Standards Committee, which the Lib Dem front bench referred to at the beginning as well, because that Standards Committee is obviously elected by the House, not appointed by whips, as this new committee will be. It's elected by the House, and it has 7 lay members who bring in external experience, including, as I said earlier, people like a retired Chief Constable and others that bring genuine independence and expertise. So it is vital that we continue to draw on the independence and experience of the Standards Committee. These are complicated issues. We heard from the Lib Dem front bench in the winding up speech just a moment ago how, for example, experience practising in medicine actually can help enrich debates and inform the proceedings of this House as Dan Poulter did when he was both a Member of Parliament and also a practising doctor as well. So there are considerations like that need to be carefully considered. And so I'm very much hoping, I might even go so far as to say expecting, that the Leader of the House, in her winding up in just a moment, will be able to give the House some assurances, particularly around the fact that the existing committees of the House, the Modernisation, the Procedures Committee, the Standards Committee, the Privileges Committee, the Administration Committee, will always be invited to produce reports up to the Modernisation Committee on matters the Modernisation Committee is due to consider, that the Speaker will always be consulted, that the work of the committee won't cut across what the House of Commons Commission does, that the Standards Commissioner will be invited, where appropriate, to make submissions and give evidence if that is appropriate and necessary. If the Leader of the House is able to give those assurances about how the committee will function and that she will seek to operate it, because I think the proposal is that she will chair it, on the basis of cross-party consensus, if those assurances are strong enough, then I would be prepared to withdraw my amendments. So I therefore wait with trembling and eager anticipation to see what the Leader of the House is able to say. But I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say it is critical we make sure the standards we maintain here are of the very, very highest level to make sure the public, our constituents, can have confidence in the work that we do.
Yeah. I now call the Leader of the House, Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I also congratulate you on your election and for making good use of the parliamentary hairdressers already. It's a tradition I hope you will maintain. And thank you to so many members of this House for taking part in today's debate. We have heard some excellent maiden speeches, as others have said. The member for Ipswich, Telford, Edinburgh East and Musselburgh, I think, Cardiff West, Glasgow South, Lincoln, Wolverhampton North East, Poole, Spelthorne, Mid-Bedfordshire, Hazel Grove and Central Suffolk and North Ipswich all made really excellent contributions. And as ever, there is always a competition for who represents the very best constituency. But of course, as I said earlier, we all know that's actually me. But anyway, we did hear some common themes around trust and dedication to constituencies and constituents and public service, and a number of contributions around the modernisation agenda too, for which I'm really grateful. On the substantive points that have been raised by others, let me address a few of those now. The Shadow Leader raised a number of issues with me, and I welcome his engagement that I have sought over recent days about these issues. And I did discuss those proposals that we were tabling with him well in advance before we tabled them. On the size of the committee, which is the subject of one of their amendments, and I know has been part of the conversation in terms of representation across this House. The current proposal is for 14. That would, under the current sort of algorithm, if you like, that represents the makeup of this House, would give 9 places to the government, 3 to the official opposition and 2 to the third party. Were we to go to 18, that would actually give the government party 12 places, the official opposition still 3, as it would have under 14, and the third party 3 as well. So actually, I did look at all these different numbers, and I felt that the number of 14 was gave the fairest distribution, actually, in terms of government and opposition parties. And even going bigger still doesn't actually bring the smaller parties into that mix, which is why I've made the very firm commitment to have that ongoing dialogue and engagement in a meaningful way with the smaller parties too. And if that included, as part of those numbers, some of the chairs of other committees, he himself might actually lose the place on the committee, because the chairs of those committees would take up those places for the official opposition. So I would ask him to think about that numbering. He asked again about the relationship between this committee and the other committees, and I think this is absolutely essential to just be really clear about this, which is that I've been very clear this is a strategic, overarching committee that will itself not seek to duplicate any of the work of other committees. Indeed, that would be a waste of everybody's time, but instead would work closely with those committees, commissioning their work, seeking their views, asking for their reports and their inputs, and indeed taking their recommendations on all of these matters, considering them carefully. I see this as what I describe as a clearinghouse, really, a task and finish group that can more quickly bring forward to the floor of the House recommendations from some of those committees and take that strategic overview about how all these different issues interrelate with one another, something which the Standards Committee itself recommended in its most recent report, where it described the very siloed and disjointed context that we do operate in these things. Very briefly.
Yeah, well, the leader's comments are extremely welcome. So just for absolute clarity, can you confirm that where the new Modernisation Committee intends to consider a matter, they will first invite the relevant other committee of the House to prepare a report and come back to the Modernisation with it?
Yeah, on the whole, absolutely, yeah. That is the intention, that is the hope. Obviously, we don't have committees of some of those chairs yet. They may not want to engage. We don't have the chairs of those committees, but that is absolutely the MO that we are hoping for this committee. We don't expect to be doing that work ourselves or duplicating that work. And on the Standards Commissioner, when it comes to standards issues, and the Standards Committee, it was raised as well by another member, the Standards Committee has a completely distinct and different role because of the relationship with the lay members, because of its relationship with the Standards Commissioner. And as I've said to the Leader of the House privately, the Standards Commissioner, I sought his advice. Oh, sorry, Shadow Leader. You know what I mean. Shadow Leader. Still getting used to this gig. But I sought the advice of the Standards Commissioner when considering how we would tighten the rules on paid advocacy, and I have followed to the letter his advice because I think that is absolutely critical. He would not want to sit on this committee. That would be a conflict of his role, but I see his role as central to drawing up any further advice on these things because he has to police it, and that's his job. Just in the short time I've got left, I hope that satisfies the Shadow Leader. Just want to pick up on a few other points. The member for North East Fife, she and I have worked closely together, and I really value her input on these issues. I think we largely agree on most of those, and absolutely we do need to take forward the recommendations on the ICGS review, and that would be a first task of the committee. The member for Blyth and Aslington, you gave a very usually erudite speech about trust and cleaning up politics, and I thank him for his contribution, and that is very much the intention of what we're seeking to do. The member for South Leicestershire, who's done invaluable work on this in his role in the past on the Standards Committee, and I'm very conscious, as I say, about the work that the lay members do and how that has to have a separate role in this context. But as he will know, the landscape review really did point to the need for a more strategic, joined-up approach on some of these issues. The member for North Herefordshire, as a newbie, with some welcome ideas. She reflects the enthusiasm of many other newbies, and I think also reflects some of the frustrations of many other newbies as well. And the member for Aberdeen North, whose speech I listened to from outside the chamber, I really do value her contribution to this debate, and I look forward to working with her. I think it's, I would love in many ways to have her on the committee, but I'm hopeful that we can find a way that ongoing relationship is meaningful and regular, and she can contribute some of the ideas that she gave today in a more formal way and continue to do that going forward. And my friend, the member for Walthamstow, gave, in a very short amount of time, some really good advice about the safety
and HR implications on the estate. And she's absolutely right to do that. We didn't get many contributions on second jobs, but those that we did, I think all agree that we really do need to take action in this space, and I'm glad to see such cross-party support for this. I hope we now won't be dividing on this issue, because I do think it's very important that today we stand here together and we don't divide the House on these issues. So we've had lots of enthusiasm, lots of support, and I hope that members will now support the motions before you today.
Order, order. Under the order of the House today, I must now put the question on the motion of the Code of Conduct and Guide to the Rules. The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to motion number 5, relating to a modernisation committee as on the order paper. I remind the House that the Speaker has selected amendments B, C, D and E as listed on the order paper. If Amendment B is defeated, Amendments C and D automatically fall, and I will not call anyone to move them. I call the Minister to move the motion formally.
Move formally.
The question is, the motion on the Modernisation Committee is on the order paper. Amendment B has been selected. I call Chris Philps.
And I withdraw on the basis of the assurances given by the Leader.
Amendment B not moved. As Amendment B has not been moved, I will not call Amendments C and D, but will now call Amendment E. I call on Chris Phelps.
Not moved on the basis of the Leader's assurances.
Amendment E not moved. The question is the motion on the Modernisation Committee as amended. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.